The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Timber Hollow as the steam engine wheezed to a stop. Clara Evelyn Reed stood on the platform, her tall frame silhouetted against the weathered wooden buildings that lined the street. At 5 feet 10 inches, she towered over most of the women disembarking alongside her, their curious glances sliding up her wool dress before quickly darting away. She clutched a worn leather satchel in one hand and a crumpled letter in the other. The paper had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases threatened to tear, but she knew every word by heart. Doctor. Jonathan Ward's proposal had arrived 6 weeks ago at the boarding house in Denver where she'd been working as a seamstress. His words had been formal but promising a respectable man seeking a capable wife to help establish his medical practice in the growing town of Timber Hollow. Clara had written back immediately. She'd been honest about her circumstances, orphaned at 16, self-sufficient for the past 8 years, skilled with needle and thread. What she hadn't mentioned was her height. Experience had taught her that men preferred to discover that particular detail in person, when it was too late to politely withdraw their interest. The platform emptied quickly as passengers dispersed into the dusty street. Clara adjusted her bonnet and smoothed her skirts, the sheep's wool fabric practical but presentable. She'd spent her last coins on this dress, wanting to make a favorable impression. A small crowd had gathered near the station. It seemed the arrival of the weekly train was something of an event in Timber Hollow. Clara scanned the faces, looking for a man who might be a doctor. Her gaze settled on a portly gentleman in a black waistcoat standing near a painted wagon. He held a medical bag and wore spectacles perched on his nose. This had to be Dr. Ward. She approached with measured steps, her boots clicking on the wooden planks. Dr. Ward, I'm Miss Clara Reed. The man looked up, his eyes widening as they traveled from her face to her full height. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The cheerful expression he'd been wearing slid away like water off a duck's back. Miss Reed. He took a step backward, his neck craning to maintain eye contact. That is to say, I've come as we arranged, Clara said quietly, though dread was already pooling in her stomach. She'd seen this reaction before. Doctor, Ward's face flushed red, then purple. He glanced around at the gathering crowd, some of whom had stopped their conversations to watch. There must be some misunderstanding. You can't be. I am Miss Clara Reed from Denver, she repeated, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. We've been corresponding for 6 weeks. The doctor laughed a sharp, uncomfortable sound. My dear woman, this won't do at all. A wife should compliment her husband, not tower over him like a scarecrow in a cornfield. Snickers rippled through the crowd. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her chin high. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. I wrote that I was seeking a proper wife. Doctor, Ward continued, his voice growing louder as if playing to his audience. A delicate creature to grace my home, not a carnival curiosity. Really, Miss Reed, did you think to trap me by hiding such an obvious defect? I hid nothing, Clara said. You never asked. No man should have to ask if his bride-to-be is a giant, the doctor's words carried across the square. More people had stopped to watch now, including a group of rough-looking men spilling out of the nearby saloon. Hey, Doc, one of them called out. Maybe she could help you reach them high shelves in your office. The laughter grew louder. Doctor, Ward seemed to feed off it, puffing up his chest. I'm afraid this arrangement is quite impossible. I'll not be made a laughingstock by taking a wife who could carry me over the threshold instead of the other way around. Clara's fingers tightened on her satchel handle. I've traveled 3 days to be here. Then you've wasted your time and mine. The doctor turned his back on her. Good day, Miss Reed. I suggest you catch the next train back to wherever you came from. Perhaps you'll find a circus in need of performers. He strode away, leaving Clara standing alone in the middle of the street. The crowd's laughter followed him like applause. Some of the onlookers drifted away. Their entertainment concluded, but others lingered, whispering behind their hands. Clara stood perfectly still, as if she could make herself invisible through sheer force of will. The sun beat down on her wool dress, and dust swirled around her boots. Her savings were gone, spent on the train ticket and this dress. The boarding house in Denver had already given away her room. She had exactly $2.37 to her name. "Well, ain't that something?" a rough voice said nearby. Doc Ward finally found himself a woman too much for him to handle. Clara didn't turn to look at the speaker. She kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the mountains rose like a promise of escape. But escape to where she had no family, no connections, nowhere to go. The sound of spurs jangling against wooden boards made her finally look down. A cowboy with greasy hair and a gap-toothed grin had approached. "Don't mind the doc, sweetheart. Some of us appreciate a woman with a little height to her. How about you let me buy you a drink?" "No, thank you," Clara said stiffly. "Aw, come on now. You look like you could use some cheering up. The Silver Dollar's got the finest whiskey this side of the Rockies." "I said no." The cowboy's grin faded. "Too good for us. Are you just like a woman thinking you're better than you are?" Doc Ward had the right idea, sending you packing. Clara bent to pick up her valise, which had grown impossibly heavy. She needed to leave this place, find somewhere to think, to plan, but as she straightened, she found her path blocked by two more men who'd wandered over from the saloon. "Where you rushing off to? Tall drink of water?" one of them slurred. "Town's not that big. Might as well get acquainted." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her voice level. "Please let me pass." "Please let me pass," the man mimicked in a high-pitched voice. "Ain't she polite? Boys all proper and ladylike, even if she is built like a telegraph pole." The crowd was growing again, but this time no one was laughing. The afternoon had taken on a different quality, meaner, hungrier. Clara recognized the shift. She'd seen it before in other towns, other places where a woman alone was fair game for whatever entertainment men could devise. She tried to step around them, but they moved with her, maintaining their barrier. The smell of whiskey and unwashed bodies was overwhelming. Her hands shook as she clutched her belongings. "I believe the lady asked you to move aside." The new voice came from behind the crowd. It was deep and steady, without any hint of threat, yet something in its tone made the men turn. Clara looked past them to see a tall man standing near the livery stable. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, and a cotton shirt rolled to the elbows, and his face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. What she could see of his features was weathered but calm. "This ain't your concern, Callan," one of the cowboys said, but he'd already taken a half-step back. The man called Callan moved forward with an unhurried stride. As he drew closer, Clara realized he was easily the tallest person in the square, several inches taller than her. In fact, it was such an unusual experience that she found herself staring. "Miss looks tired from her journey," Callan said mildly. "Seems like she'd appreciate some peace to collect herself." "We were just being friendly," the gap-toothed cowboy protested. "Then be friendly somewhere else." There was no heat in the words, but something in Callan's presence made the men reconsider. They grumbled and spat in the dust, but began to drift back toward the saloon. The crowd, robbed of its spectacle, gradually dispersed. Clara found herself alone with her unexpected defender. Up close, she could see his face more clearly, strong jaw darkened with a day's worth of stubble, eyes the color of winter sky, lines carved by sun and wind at their corners. He studied her with the same frank assessment she was giving him. "Thank you," she managed. He touched the brim of his hat slightly. "You planning on staying in Timber Hollow?" Clara felt the weight of her near-empty purse, the crumpled letter in her pocket, the curious eyes still watching from doorways and windows. I haven't decided." Callan glanced at her valise, then at the disappearing figure of Doctor Ward in the distance. Understanding flickered in his eyes, but he didn't comment on what he'd witnessed. Instead, he simply said, "If you need a place to stay tonight, there's a boarding house 2 streets over. Mrs. Henley runs a respectable establishment." "Thank you," Clara said again. I'll consider it." He nodded and turned to go, then paused. "Name's Wyatt Callan. I run the horse ranch just outside town." "Clara Reed," she replied automatically. "Welcome to Timber Hollow, Miss Reed." There might have been irony in the words, but his tone remained neutral. "Such as it is." He walked back toward the livery stable, his long stride eating up the distance. Clara watched him go, then looked around the now quiet street. The sun was beginning to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. She had a decision to make: stay and face whatever tomorrow might bring in this rough town, or find a way to leave with the little money she had left. Her feet made the choice for her, carrying her away from the train station and deeper into Timber Hollow. Whatever came next, she would meet it with her chin high and her back straight, just as she always had. The West was supposed to be a place where people could remake themselves. Perhaps that was still true, even for a too-tall woman with no prospects and a heart full of carefully managed disappointments. As she walked, she didn't notice the figure of Wyatt Callan standing in the shadow of the livery stable, watching her progress down the dusty street with thoughtful eyes. The boarding house Mrs. Henley ran was clean but costly, $1 a night, meals not included. Clara sat on the narrow bed, counting her remaining coins by the light of a single candle. At this rate, she had 2 nights' lodging at most. The widow Henley had been kind enough, but her eyes held the shrewd calculation of someone who'd seen too many desperate women pass through her doors. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the harsh reality of her situation. Clara dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a practical brown calico, and ventured out to explore Timber Hollow's employment possibilities. The general store didn't need help. The restaurant already had a serving girl. The milliner took one look at Clara's plain attire and shook her head. By noon, Clara's feet ached and her spirits had sunk lower than the afternoon shadows. She found herself at the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land. That's when she noticed it, a loaded wagon tilted at an odd angle. One wheel sunk deep in a rut. A young woman in a yellow dress stood beside it, looking near tears. "Do you need assistance?" Clara called out. The woman turned, relief flooding her face. "Oh, thank goodness, I've been stuck here for ages. My husband's at the cattle auction, and I foolishly thought I could manage the supplies run myself." Clara assessed the situation. The wagon was heavy with sacks of flour and feed, but between the two of them, they might manage. If we unload some weight and use that plank as leverage. Working together, they freed the wagon within 20 minutes. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Sarah Morrison, was effusive in her gratitude. "You must let me repay you. At least come for tea." Clara hesitated, aware of her dusty dress and uncertain status, but Sarah insisted. They drove back toward town, chatting easily. Sarah was new to Timber Hollow herself, married just 6 months to a rancher named Tom. "It's lonely sometimes," Sarah confided. "The ranch wives are friendly enough, but they're all so busy with children and chores. I do miss having another woman to really talk with." They were passing the livery stable when Clara spotted a familiar figure. Wyatt Callan was leading a magnificent black mare from the stables, his movements sure and gentle despite the animal's obvious agitation. A smaller figure darted out from behind a post, a little girl with dark curls escaping from her bonnet. Papa, can I pet her?" Wyatt's stern expression softened instantly. He knelt beside the child, keeping one hand on the mare's bridle. "Not this one. Junebug, she's still too wild. Remember what I taught you about reading a horse's mood?" The child, she couldn't have been more than 4, studied the mare with serious eyes. "Her ears are back. That means she's scared." "That's right. We need to give her time to trust us." Clara found herself slowing to watch the interaction. There was something achingly tender in the way this large, quiet man made himself small for his daughter. The patience in his voice as he explained the horse's body language. Sarah noticed her interest. "That's Wyatt Callan. Lost his wife last year, terrible thing. Died in childbirth. He's been raising little June alone ever since. They say she hasn't spoken a word since her mother passed." Clara's heart clenched. The child was gesturing animatedly. But Sarah was right, no sound came from her small mouth. "He's a good man," Sarah continued. "Tom says he's the best horse trainer in 3 counties. Honest as the day is long. 2, it's a shame about, well," she lowered her voice. "Some of the town gossips say he should remarry for the child's sake. But Wyatt won't hear of it. Says June doesn't need a replacement mother. Just time to heal." They were about to pass when June suddenly broke away from her father and ran directly into the street. Clara reacted instinctively, catching the child before she could dart in front of an approaching freight wagon. "Careful there, little one," Clara said gently, setting June safely on the boardwalk. June stared up at her with wide brown eyes, her father's eyes. Clara realized. The child's mouth opened as if to speak, then closed again. Instead, she reached up and touched Clara's skirt, fingering the fabric with obvious fascination. "June!" Wyatt had crossed the street in quick strides. "You know better than to run into traffic." His voice was firm, but not harsh. He looked up at Clara, and she saw recognition flicker across his features. "Miss Reed, thank you." "She's quick," Clara said, suddenly aware of how she must look dusty, travel-worn, obviously struggling. "No harm done." June tugged on her father's pants leg, pointing insistently at Clara's dress. Wyatt's expression grew puzzled as he tried to interpret his daughter's gestures. "I think she likes the texture," Clara ventured, without thinking. She knelt to June's level. "It's wool, but very soft. See?" She held out a fold of her skirt. "My mother taught me to always check fabric this way between your fingers, like you're reading a secret message in the threads." June's face lit up. She carefully mimicked Clara's gesture, running the fabric between her small fingers. A smile the first Clara had seen from the child spread across her face. "Well," Sarah said softly, "would you look at that?" Wyatt was staring at his daughter with an unreadable expression. June had moved closer to Clara, examining the simple embroidery at the hem with intense concentration. "You sew?" Wyatt asked quietly. "Yes, I am a seamstress by trade." "Papa!" June tugged at Wyatt's hand, then pointed at her own dress, a store-bought calico that had seen better days. The hem was coming undone, and one sleeve showed a poorly mended tear. "I know, bug, Mrs. Patterson did her best, but—" He stopped, seeming to realize he was explaining his domestic failures to a near stranger. Clara rose, brushing dust from her skirts. "It was lovely to meet you properly, June." She nodded to Wyatt. "Mr. Callan." She turned to go, but June darted forward and caught her hand. The child's grip was surprisingly strong as she pulled Clara back toward her father. June's other hand found Wyatt's, and she stood between them, looking up with an expectant expression. "June," Wyatt said, a note of embarrassment creeping into his voice. "Miss Reed has her own affairs to attend to." But June held firm, her small face set in determination. She pulled again, clearly trying to bring them together. "I should go," Clara said, though something in the child's desperate grip made her hesitate. Sarah, who had been watching with increasing interest, suddenly spoke up. "Actually, Clara was just coming to tea with me. The Morrison Ranch is right next to yours, isn't it, Mr. Callan? Perhaps you and June would like to join us. I've been meaning to be more neighborly." Wyatt looked like he was about to refuse, but June bounced on her toes, still holding both their hands. He glanced down at his daughter, then back at Clara. "That's kind of you, Mrs. Morrison, but—" "Oh, please do come," Sarah pressed. Tom's always saying I make too much food for just the two of us. And I have those lemon cookies June liked so much at the church social." At the mention of cookies, June's bouncing intensified. Wyatt sighed the sound of a man who knew when he was outmaneuvered. "For a short visit, then let me just secure midnight here." He gently extracted his hand from June's grip and led the black mare to the hitching post. June immediately transferred both hands to Clara's, looking up with those serious brown eyes. "She's quite taken with you," Sarah observed. "I haven't seen her warm to anyone like that since, well..." Clara looked down at the child holding her hand with such trust. "Children often know things adults miss," she said softly. The ride to the Morrison Ranch passed quickly. Sarah chattered about town life while Wyatt drove his own wagon behind them. June seated beside him but turned backward to keep Clara in sight. The child's intense focus would have been unsettling if it weren't so earnest. The Morrison Ranch house was modest but welcoming, with checkered curtains and a vegetable garden already showing spring growth. Sarah bustled about preparing tea while Clara found herself seated on a comfortable sofa. June pressed close against her side. Wyatt stood awkwardly near the door, hat in hand. "June, don't crowd Miss Reed." But Clara had already discovered that June was tracing the embroidered flowers on her cuff with one small finger. "She's fine. I think she's interested in needlework." She looked down at the child. "Would you like to learn how to make flowers like these?" June's enthusiastic nod nearly upset the tea tray Sarah was carrying in. "I've been trying to find someone to teach her feminine crafts," Wyatt said, finally taking a seat. "Mrs. Patterson means well, but she's got 7 of her own to tend, and June's too young for the school just yet." "Clara's looking for work," Sarah said brightly, passing around cups. "She's new to town, like I was. Isn't it funny how things work out?" Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mrs. Morrison, I don't think—" "You're seeking employment," Wyatt interrupted, his tone carefully neutral. "I am, but I wouldn't presume—" "Papa!" June had abandoned her study of Clara's embroidery to tug at her father's sleeve. She pointed at Clara, then at herself, then made a sewing motion with her hands. Her meaning was crystal clear. "June wants everything she wants right when she wants it," Wyatt said, but his tone was fond. He studied Clara over his teacup. "You said you're a seamstress by trade. Have you experience with children?" "I helped raise my younger sisters before they passed." Clara kept her voice steady. "And I've taught sewing at the Methodist Ladies' Society in Denver." "Denver's a far piece from here. What brings you to Timber Hollow?" Clara felt Sarah's curious gaze join Wyatt's. She lifted her chin. "Employment, which, as it turns out, has been difficult to secure. If Wyatt knew about yesterday's humiliation with Dr. Ward, he gave no sign. He simply nodded, as if unemployed seamstresses appeared in Timber Hollow every day. "My ranch is just 2 miles from town. I've a housekeeper who comes 3 times a week, Mrs. Aldrich, but June needs more than just someone to cook and clean. She needs—" He paused, looking at his daughter, who had climbed into Clara's lap without invitation. "She needs someone who can reach her." "Mr. Callan, I appreciate your consideration, but you don't know anything about me. I know you stopped June from running into traffic. I know she's smiled more in the last hour than she has in the past month. And I know you're too proud to beg for work despite needing it." His eyes were steady on hers. "Sometimes that's enough." Clara felt something flutter in her chest. Hope. Maybe. Or fear. "What exactly would you need?" "Someone to mind June during the day. Teach her letters and numbers when she's ready, sewing and whatnot as she shows interest. Help with her clothes, as you can see. We're managing poorly in that area. Room and board included, plus wages we can discuss." "Wyatt," Sarah interjected gently. "People will talk. A young woman, living at your ranch." "People talk regardless," Wyatt said flatly. "They talked when Margaret died. They talked when June stopped speaking. Let them talk about this too." He looked back at Clara. There's a room off the kitchen, used to be Margaret's sewing room. It's private, with its own entrance. Entirely proper. June had discovered Clara's sleeve buttons and was examining them with the focus of a scientist. Clara felt the child's warm weight against her chest, trusting and immediate in the way only children could be. "Could I have a day to consider?" she asked. "Of course." Wyatt stood, setting down his cup. "The offer stands as long as you need. Come, June, we've imposed on Mrs. Morrison's hospitality long enough." June's face crumpled. She clutched at Clara's dress, shaking her head vigorously. "June?" Wyatt's voice held a warning. "We discussed this. When it's time to go, we go gracefully." The child's lower lip trembled, but she slid from Clara's lap. Then, in a movement that clearly surprised everyone, she stood on the tiptoe and kissed Clara's cheek before running to her father. Wyatt's expression softened. He swung June up into his arms, where she hid her face against his shoulder. "Thank you for tea, Mrs. Morrison, Miss Reed." He touched his hat brim and was gone. Sarah waited until the wagon rolled away before turning to Clara with bright eyes. "My dear, you'd be foolish not to accept. Would I, a single woman, living at the ranch of a widower? You said yourself people would talk. People in Timber Hollow would gossip about the weather if given half a chance. But did you see that child? She needs you. And frankly," Sarah lowered her voice, "Wyatt Callan needs help too. Though he'd never admit it, Tom says he barely sleeps, trying to run the ranch and raise June alone." Clara moved to the window, watching the dust from Wyatt's wagon settle in the distance. It would be a respectable position. More than respectable, necessary. And Wyatt Callan's word is gold in this town. If he says the arrangement is proper, even the busiest gossips will think twice before suggesting otherwise. That evening, Clara sat in her narrow room at the boarding house, weighing her options. Stay in town and hope for work that might never come. Use her last dollar for a train ticket to another uncertain future, or accept a position that offered stability, purpose. And she admitted to herself the chance to help a child who had already wormed her way into Clara's heart. By morning, her mind was made up. She dressed in her best wool dress, the one June had so admired, and asked Mrs. Henley for directions to the Callan Ranch. The road wound through stands of cottonwoods and across a clear-running creek. The ranch, when it came into view, was larger than she'd expected, a solid 2-story house with a wide porch, several well-maintained outbuildings, and paddocks where horses grazed in the morning sun. Clara had barely knocked when the door flew open. June stood there, still in her nightgown, bouncing on her bare feet. Behind her, Wyatt appeared, looking harried. "June saw you from the window," he explained. "She's been watching since sunrise." He glanced down at his daughter, though she was supposed to be getting dressed. June grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her inside with surprising strength. The house smelled of coffee and wood smoke, masculine but clean. June dragged her through a parlor and into what was clearly the kitchen, where she pointed triumphantly at a door. Wyatt followed, looking somewhat embarrassed by his daughter's enthusiasm. "That's the room I mentioned. Would you like to see it?" The sewing room was better than Clara had dared hope. Large windows faced east, providing excellent light. There was a bed with a quilted coverlet, a washstand, shelves that had once held fabric and notions, and blessedly a small stove for warmth. The separate entrance opened onto a side garden. "It's perfect," Clara said softly. "Then the position's yours, if you want it." Wyatt named a wage that was modest but fair. "Mrs. Aldrich will still come for heavy cleaning and some cooking. You'd have Sundays free, and Saturday afternoons when I'm home." Clara turned to find June had attached herself to her skirts again. The child looked up with those expressive brown eyes, hope written clearly across her small face. "When would you need me to start? Is today too soon?" Wyatt's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "As you can see, We're already behind schedule this morning." Clara looked around the room that would be hers private, respectable, safe. She thought of the alternative, the uncertain road, the dwindling coins, the constant worry. But more than that, she thought of June's small hand in hers, of the trust already building between them. Today would be fine, she said. And so Clara Evelyn Reed, who had come to Timber Hollow as a mail-order bride and been rejected for standing too tall, found herself with a position, a purpose, and a child who needed her. As Wyatt showed her where things were kept and explained June's routines, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the sense of coming home. The first evening in the Callan household revealed truths that daylight had hidden. Clara had managed well enough through the afternoon, helping June with simple tasks, exploring the house, learning the child's preferences through gestures and smiles. But when supper time arrived, the peculiar rhythm of this broken family became clear. Wyatt moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, heating beans and slicing bread with the mechanical precision of someone who had performed these tasks countless times without joy. The table was set for 3, but Clara noticed the layer of dust on one chair, the way Wyatt's eyes skipped over it entirely. "June usually eats at 6, he said, not meeting Clara's gaze. "I'll take my plate to the study. Need to review the accounts." Clara watched him ladle beans onto 2 plates, one child-sized, one regular. Nothing for himself. "There's plenty for 3. Mr. Callan? I prefer to work while I eat." His tone wasn't unfriendly, merely closed. "June knows her bedtime routine. I'll check on her before I turn in." He left before Clara could respond, carrying his coffee but no food. June watched her father go with solemn eyes, then turned back to her own plate. She ate mechanically, without the enthusiasm most children showed for meals. Clara took her place at the dusty chair, wiping it clean with her apron first. The beans were adequate, the bread fresh enough, but the silence pressed against her ears. She tried to engage June with questions that could be answered with nods or gestures, but the child seemed to retreat into herself as darkness gathered outside the windows. After supper, Clara discovered why the kitchen table bore subtle scars and stains. June climbed onto a chair and reached for a high shelf, producing a wooden box. Inside were pieces of fabric, half-finished embroidery, spools of thread in various stages of unwinding. The child spread these treasures across the table with reverent hands. "Were these your mother's?" Clara asked gently. June nodded, fingering a piece of half-finished pillowcase embroidery. The stitches were elegant, precise, the work of someone who took pride in beauty for its own sake. June traced the pattern with one small finger, her face a study in concentration and loss. Clara heard Wyatt's footsteps in the hallway pause outside the kitchen door. She waited, but he didn't enter. After a moment, the steps continued to his study. "Would you like to learn how your mother made these stitches?" Clara asked. June's face transformed. She nodded vigorously, pushing the pillowcase toward Clara with eager hands. For the next hour, Clara guided those small fingers through basic stitches, using scraps from the box. June's focus was absolute, her determination fierce despite multiple failed attempts. When bedtime arrived, June went willingly enough, changing into her nightgown and allowing Clara to brush her tangled curls. But when Clara turned to leave, small hands caught her sleeve. "Would you like me to stay until you fall asleep?" Clara asked. June's grateful nod was answer enough. Clara settled on the edge of the narrow bed, humming softly lullabies her own mother had sung years ago. June's eyes grew heavy, but she fought sleep, one hand firmly gripping Clara's. It was nearly an hour before the child finally surrendered to exhaustion. Clara carefully extracted her hand and crept from the room. The house was dark, save for a sliver of light beneath Wyatt's study door. She heard the scratch of his pen, the occasional rustle of paper. In her own room, Clara unpacked her few belongings by candlelight, The space already felt more like home than any place she'd lived since leaving her childhood farm. She hung her dresses on the pegs provided, arranged her small sewing kit on the shelf, placed her mother's Bible on the bedside table. She was just preparing for bed when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow and careful. Through her thin door, she heard Wyatt enter June's room. The floorboards creaked as he moved to the bed, presumably checking on his sleeping daughter. There was a long silence, then the soft sound of a chair being pulled close to the bed. Clara pressed her ear to the door, knowing she shouldn't eavesdrop but unable to resist. Wyatt's voice came low and rough, barely above a whisper. "She's kind, Junebug, patient, like your mama was. You chose well." A pause. "I know you miss her. I miss her too. Every hour of every day. But maybe Miss Reed can help fill some of that empty space. For you, little one. Just for you." The chair creaked again. Footsteps retreated. Clara moved away from the door, her throat tight. She'd understood when accepting this position that she was entering a household shaped by grief. What she hadn't expected was how that grief lived in the spaces between words, in the empty chair at dinner, in a father who ate alone rather than face his daughter across the gap where his wife should be. The next days fell into a pattern. Clara woke early to start breakfast, finding Wyatt already gone to tend the horses. June would appear in her nightgown, clutching whichever sewing project she'd chosen to work on. They'd eat together, June occasionally laughing silently at Clara's attempts to make porridge more interesting with faces drawn in jam. Wyatt would return mid-morning, accepting coffee with a nod but declining food. He'd speak to Clara about June's needs, the household schedule, practical matters. But he never lingered, never sat at the table with them, never smiled except when looking at his daughter. The torn tablecloth became Clara's first challenge. She discovered it folded in a drawer, a fine piece of linen marred by a terrible rent down the middle. June's face crumpled when she saw it, and she pushed it toward Clara with desperate hands. "This was special, wasn't it?" Clara examined the damage. "I think we can fix it. Would you like to help?" They spent the morning on the repair, Clara showing June how to make tiny, invisible stitches that would hold the fabric together without showing. It was painstaking work for small fingers, but June persisted with remarkable patience. When Wyatt came in for his noon coffee, he stopped short at the sight of them bent over the tablecloth. Something flickered across his face, pain, perhaps, or memory. "That was Margaret's grandmother's," he said quietly, "from her hope chest." "It's beautiful work," Clara said, not looking up from her stitching. "June's been helping me repair it. She has steady hands." Wyatt moved closer, watching his daughter work. June looked up at him, pointing proudly to her section of stitches. For a moment, his face softened entirely. "Your mama would be proud," he told June. Then, as if catching himself being too open, he straightened. "I'll be in the north pasture this afternoon." But he lingered another moment, watching them work. Clara felt the weight of his gaze, the questions he didn't ask. She kept her focus on the linen, on June's careful fingers, on the slow work of making something whole again. That Sunday, Clara attended church in town. She'd offered to stay with June, but Wyatt insisted she take her day off. "We managed before," he said gruffly. "We can manage one day a week." The service was uneventful, but the gathering afterward buzzed with whispers. Clara held her head high, greeting those she'd met with polite distance. Sarah Morrison appeared at her elbow like a saving grace. "How are you settling in?" Sarah asked, loud enough for nearby gossips to hear. "Tom says Wyatt's never looked so rested." "June is a delightful child," Clara replied, matching Sarah's volume. "Very eager to learn. Such a tragedy, losing her voice like that. But children are resilient, aren't they, with the right care?" Clara understood Sarah's game and played along, speaking warmly of June's progress, The perfectly respectable arrangement. Mrs. Aldrich's continued presence, gradually. The sharp looks softened to curiosity. But one woman, older and pinched-faced, approached directly. "You're the one living in Wyatt Callan's house." "I'm employed as June's governess, Mrs. Thornberry." I knew Margaret Callan well. A proper lady, delicate and refined. Nothing like... Her eyes traveled Clara's height dismissively. "Indeed," Clara said calmly. "I'm sure Mrs. Callan's memory is a blessing to all who knew her." "Mrs." Thornberry's eyes narrowed. "See that you remember your place. Miss Reed, that household has suffered enough scandal." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice level. "I'm not sure what scandal you mean, Mrs. Thornberry. I see only a father doing his best for his child." She walked away before the woman could respond, but the encounter left her shaken. What scandal Margaret Callan had died in childbirth tragic, but hardly scandalous. The mystery deepened that evening when Clara found June in the parlor, a photo album open in her lap. The child was tracing a photograph with one finger, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Clara sat beside her, looking at the image. A beautiful woman with dark hair and laughing eyes sat in a garden, holding an infant June. Wyatt stood behind them, his hand on his wife's shoulder, smiling with an openness Clara had never seen from him. "She was lovely," Clara said softly. June turned pages, showing Clara more images. Margaret at a piano, Margaret on horseback, Margaret and Wyatt at what must have been their wedding, both glowing with joy. Then June turned to a page that had been torn out, leaving only corners of photographs. The child's fingers hovered over the empty space, her small body trembling. "What happened here?" Clara asked gently. June shook her head violently and slammed the album shut. She clutched it to her chest, rocking slightly. Clara reached out instinctively, and June collapsed against her, sobbing without sound. Wyatt appeared in the doorway. His face went white at the sight of the album. "June, you know you're not supposed to..." He stopped, seeing his daughter's distress. In 3 strides, he was kneeling beside them, gathering June into his arms. The child buried her face in his shirt, her small body shaking. "It's all right. Bug, it's all right." He looked at Clara over June's head. "She found the album." "I'm sorry. I didn't know she wasn't allowed." "She is allowed. It's just..." He closed his eyes briefly. Some memories are harder than others. June pulled back, touching her father's face with both hands. She pointed to the album, then to her own throat, shaking her head. "No, sweetheart. What happened to Mama wasn't your fault. I've told you that." His voice was fierce with conviction. "Never your fault." June didn't look convinced. She slipped from his arms and ran to her room. Wyatt stayed kneeling on the floor, looking older than his years. "She blames herself," Clara said quietly. "For her mother's death." Wyatt's jaw worked. Margaret was fragile. The doctor said she shouldn't have another child after June, but she wanted. He stopped. "It doesn't matter what she wanted. She's gone, and June hasn't spoken since the day we buried her." He stood abruptly, taking the album. "I should put this away." "Mr. Callan." Clara rose too. "June needs to grieve. Hiding the pictures won't..." "What June needs," he said sharply, "is to move forward, not live in the past. Like you're doing eating alone, avoiding every reminder." The words hung between them. Wyatt's face flushed. "You've been here a week, Miss Reed. Don't presume to understand this family's pain." He left before Clara could apologize. She heard his study door close firmly. The sound of the lock turning. Message clear, some wounds were not to be touched. But Clara had learned something important. June's silence wasn't simple grief, it was guilt, somehow connected to her mother's death. And Wyatt, for all his devotion, was too wrapped in his own pain to see how his withdrawal was confirming his daughter's fears. She found June curled on her bed, still trembling. Clara sat beside her, not touching, just present. "I lost my mother too," she said quietly. "I was older than you, 16, but I remember thinking if I'd been better, if I'd helped more, maybe she wouldn't have gotten sick." June peeked at her through tangled hair. "It took me years to understand that sometimes people die, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just life being cruel and unfair." Clara's voice stayed soft. "Your mama loved you. Whatever happened, she wouldn't want you carrying this weight." June uncurled slightly. She pointed to her throat, then shook her head, fresh tears falling. "You think your voice is gone because of what happened?" A miserable nod. Clara considered her words carefully. "Or maybe your voice is just resting, waiting until you're ready to use it again. There's no rush, sweet girl. When you have something important enough to say, I think your words will come back." June crept closer, not quite touching, but near enough that Clara could feel her warmth. They sat in companionable silence as darkness gathered outside. Finally, June's breathing evened into sleep. Clara covered her with a quilt and returned to the kitchen. She wasn't surprised to find Wyatt there, coffee cold in his hands. "I apologize," he said without preamble. "You were trying to help." "I overstepped." "No." He looked up at her. "You saw what I've been too blind to see. She does blame herself. Margaret had difficulties after June's birth. Dark moods, wild swings. The doctor called it nervous exhaustion. She'd have spells where she couldn't care for June at all. Then periods of frantic energy where she'd reorganize the entire house or start a dozen projects." Clara sank into a chair, understanding dawning. That must have been frightening for a small child. June was barely 3 when Margaret insisted on another baby. Said it would fix everything, make her complete. "I tried." His hands clenched around the cup. "I tried to dissuade her, but she was so convinced, so desperately hopeful." The pregnancy went badly. From the start, Margaret grew weaker, more unstable. June would try to help, bringing her little gifts, singing songs. Margaret would push her away during the dark times, then weep and apologize when clarity returned. Clara's heart ached for all of them, the struggling mother, the confused child, the husband trying to hold his family together. The night she died, Wyatt continued, his voice barely audible. June was singing to her, that little lullaby about mockingbirds. Margaret started bleeding, and June kept singing, thinking it would help. She was still singing when... He couldn't finish. He didn't need to. Clara could picture it too clearly, a small girl singing desperately while her mother's life ebbed away, forever linking her voice to that terrible loss. "She needs to know it wasn't her fault," Clara said, "that her singing didn't cause... I've told her 100 times." "But do you believe it?" Wyatt's head snapped up. "What? Do you blame her, even a tiny part of you?" "No." The vehemence in his voice shook the windows. Then, quieter. "No, I blame myself, for not being stronger, for not getting Margaret better help, for letting her convince me to try again when I knew." He stopped. "I blame myself for everything except June. She was the only purely good thing in those last years." Clara believed him, but she also understood that children were perceptive in ways adults forgot. June had likely sensed the complexity of her father's grief, the unspoken tensions, the careful distance he kept. "She's lucky to have you," Clara said finally. "Not every father would be so devoted." Wyatt's laugh was bitter. "Devoted? I can't even eat a meal with her without seeing Margaret's empty chair. What kind of devotion is that?" "The kind that does its best despite the pain. That's all any of us can do." They sat in silence, the kitchen clock ticking between them. Finally, Wyatt stood. "Tomorrow's washing day. Mrs. Aldrich will need the copper boiler filled early." Back to practical matters. Safe ground. Clara accepted the retreat. Of course. He paused at the doorway. Miss Reed, thank you for being patient with June, for seeing what she needs. She's easy to care for, Mr. Callan. Something flickered in his eyes' warmth, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. Wyatt, he said. In private. You can call me Wyatt. It seems appropriate, given the circumstances. He was gone before Clara could respond, leaving her alone in the kitchen where a family had once gathered, where laughter had presumably rung before sorrow moved in to stay. She looked at the mended tablecloth folded on the counter, at June's careful stitches holding the torn pieces together. Perhaps that's what this household needed, not replacement or forgetting, but patient mending, stitch by stitch, day by day, until the tears were visible only to those who knew where to look. It wouldn't be the same as before, but it might be whole enough to hold new memories, new possibilities. Clara rose to check on June one more time, then retired to her own room. Through her window, she could see light still burning in Wyatt's study. She wondered if he ever truly slept, or if he spent his nights wrestling with ghosts and what-ifs. Time would tell if this fractured family could heal. But for now, Clara was here, ready to help them try. The abandoned woodshed stood behind the main house, weathered board silver with age and neglect. Clara discovered it while chasing one of the June's ribbons that had blown away in the spring wind. The door hung askew on rusty hinges, revealing a space filled with forgotten tools and thick dust. This could work, she murmured, already envisioning possibilities. June tugged at her skirt, pointing questioningly at the shed. What if we made this into a proper sewing room? Clara asked. A place where we could work on bigger projects, maybe even take in some mending from town. The child's eyes widened with interest. She darted inside, stirring up dust clouds that made them both sneeze. An old workbench ran along one wall, sturdy despite its coating of grime. Shelves lined another wall, empty but still solid. That evening, Clara broached the subject carefully. Wyatt was reviewing feed bills at the kitchen table while she cleaned up after supper. The old woodshed out back, she began. Is it being used for anything? He glanced up. Haven't touched it since we built the new one closer to the barn. Why? I was thinking. June shows real aptitude for needlework. If I could clean it out, perhaps set up a proper workspace. You want to turn it into a sewing room? His tone was neutral, giving nothing away. Only if you approve. I could take in mending from town, contribute to the household expenses, and June needs something that's hers, something that isn't shadowed by Margaret. He set down his pen. She had her sewing room in the house, which is my bedroom now. This would be different. New. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. You'd need supplies, thread, needles, fabric. I have some saved, and once word spreads that I'm taking in work, the payment would cover more. The roof might leak. I haven't checked it in 2 years. I'm handy with repairs. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Are you now? Clara lifted her chin. I've been taking care of myself for 8 years. Mr. Callan, I've learned to fix what needs fixing. Wyatt, he corrected quietly. Very well. If you're willing to clean it out, it's yours. The next days were a whirlwind of activity. Clara and June attacked the shed with brooms and rags, sending years of dust flying. They discovered treasures amid the debris glass bottles that caught the light, lengths of good rope, even an old rocking chair that only needed minor repairs. Mrs. Aldrich, the housekeeper who came 3 times a week, watched their efforts with interest. Haven't seen anyone work that hard since Margaret decided to repaint the entire house while carrying June, she commented, then caught herself. Beg pardon, I shouldn't speak of... It's all right, Clara said. June needs to hear her mother mentioned naturally, not in whispers. The older woman studied her. You're not what I expected when Wyatt said he'd hired a governess. What did you expect? Someone who'd try to replace her, make everything new and different. Mrs. Aldrich nodded toward June, who was carefully sorting buttons they'd found in an old tin. Instead, you're helping them remember while still moving forward. That's wisdom beyond your years. Clara felt warmth at the approval. I lost my mother young. I know what it's like to fear forgetting. As the shed transformed, so did interest from town. Sarah Morrison was first, bringing a torn riding habit. I'd trust you over Mrs. Peterson any day. She charges a fortune and her seams are crooked. Word spread as word does in small towns. Soon Clara had a steady stream of work-torn shirts, worn-out hems, a wedding dress needing alteration. She set up a system where customers could leave items in a basket by the shed door, maintaining propriety by avoiding direct visits to the house. June proved an eager assistant, her small fingers growing more skilled each day. She had an eye for color and could sort thread or match buttons with remarkable accuracy. Best of all, the work seemed to bring her joy uncomplicated by grief. One afternoon, a familiar, unwelcome figure appeared at the shed door. Dr. Jonathan Ward stood there in his black suit, medical bag in hand. Miss Reed. His tone dripped false courtesy. I heard you'd found employment. Clara kept her eyes on her stitching. Dr. Ward, is there something I can help you with? I came to check on the Callan child, as the town physician. I feel a responsibility. June is perfectly healthy. Is she a child who doesn't speak living in irregular circumstances? He stepped closer. I've been telling Wyatt for months the girl needs proper medical attention, perhaps an institution that specializes in defective children. Clara's needle stilled. June is not defective. A professional opinion. Is it from a seamstress? June, who had been organizing ribbon in the corner, went very still. Clara saw her shoulders hunch, making herself smaller. She's grieving, Clara said firmly. That's not a medical condition requiring institutional care. Dr. Ward's smile was unpleasant. Ah, but grief that persists becomes melancholia. And in children, it can indicate deeper deficiencies. I've seen it before. Best to address it now before she becomes a permanent burden on her father. Get out! Clara stood, her height advantage never more appreciated. Leave this property immediately. I'm trying to help. You're trying to meddle where you're not wanted. June is loved, cared for, and improving daily. She needs no intervention from you. His face flushed. You forget yourself. Miss Reed, you're merely hired help. When Wyatt tires of this arrangement, and he will who will protect the child, then I will. The words came from behind Dr. Ward. Wyatt stood in the doorway, his face carved from stone. The only deficiency here, doctor, is in your character. Get off my land. Doctor, Ward sputtered. Wyatt, be reasonable. The child needs... My daughter needs nothing from you, ever. Wyatt stepped aside, a clear invitation to leave. Don't come back unless someone's dying. Even then, we might prefer to take our chances. The doctor left in a huff of wounded dignity. Wyatt watched him go before turning to June, who flew into his arms. Don't listen to him. Bug, you're perfect exactly as you are. He held her tight, meeting Clara's eyes over the child's head. Thank you for defending her. Anyone would have... No, they wouldn't. His voice was rough. Most people whisper behind their hands but say nothing direct. You stood up to him. That matters. That evening, Wyatt appeared at the shed with a box. These were Margaret's, he said, setting it on the workbench. Good supplies going to waste in storage. Thought you might use them. Clara opened the box carefully. Inside were beautiful fabrics, quality threads, specialized needles, a fortune in sewing supplies. Are you sure? June should see them used, not hidden away. He touched a piece of blue silk. Margaret made my wedding shirt from this. Always said she'd make June a dress from the remainder when she was old enough. We could still do that, June and I together. Wyatt's throat worked. She'd like that. Margaret would too. It was the first time he'd spoken of his wife in the present tense, as if some part of her lived on in more than just memory. Clara began to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting, but about finding ways to carry the past forward without letting it crush the future. As the weeks passed, the shed became a haven. Town ladies came for alterations and stayed for conversation. June bloomed under the attention, learning to communicate with customers through gestures and written notes. She had a talent for understanding what people wanted even when they couldn't articulate it. "Your daughter has quite an eye, Mrs." Morrison told Wyatt one day when she came to collect a repaired tablecloth. She suggested adding this trim, and it's perfect. Wyatt had come to inspect the roof unnecessarily, as it proved sound, and stayed to watch June work. "She gets that from her mother, and the determination from her father, I'd wager," Sarah said with a knowing smile. Clara watched this interaction from her seat at the workbench. Wyatt had begun spending more time around the shed, finding reasons to check on things, to bring coffee during cold afternoons, to simply observe his daughter's happiness. One evening, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. Clara and June were in the shed, finishing a rush order. When the sky opened, rain hammered the roof, and wind shook the walls. "We should get to the house," Clara said, but when she opened the door, the deluge was impenetrable. June pressed against her, trembling. Thunder crashed overhead, and the child covered her ears. Clara pulled her close, wrapping them both in a quilt from the mending pile. The door burst open. Wyatt stood there, soaked through, water streaming from his hat. "Are you all right?" "Just wet," Clara assured him. But June reached for her father with desperate hands. He scooped her up without hesitation, then looked at Clara. "We'll have to run for it. Can you manage?" "Of course." But when Clara stood, her foot caught in the quilt. She stumbled, and Wyatt's free arm caught her waist, steadying her. For a moment, they stood pressed together, June between them, rain pounding beyond the door. "Ready?" His voice was rough. Clara nodded, not trusting her own voice. They plunged into the storm, running for the house. By the time they reached the kitchen, all three were drenched and laughing, even June's silent laughter shaking her small frame. "Towels!" Clara gasped. "I'll get towels." She hurried away, needing distance from the unexpected intimacy of that moment in the shed. When she returned with an armload of towels, Wyatt had already wrapped June in a blanket and was stoking the fire. "You're shivering," he said, taking a towel and draping it around Clara's shoulders. His hands lingered for just a moment, warming her more than the cloth. "The storm came up so fast, she managed—" "They do that here. I should have warned you." He rubbed June's hair with another towel, gentle and thorough. "Hot soup for everyone, I think." It was the first time he suggested eating together. Clara tried not to read too much into it, busying herself with heating the leftover stew while Wyatt helped June into dry clothes. When they gathered at the table, all three of them, it felt both foreign and right. June sat between them, her eyes darting back and forth as if afraid the moment might shatter. "This is nice," Wyatt said quietly, then seemed surprised at himself for speaking the thought aloud. Clara smiled into her bowl. "Yes, it is." The storm raged outside, but inside the kitchen was warm and full of possibility. June leaned against her father's arm while reaching for Clara's hand, connecting them like a small bridge between two shores. After June was in bed, Clara found Wyatt standing on the porch, watching the rain. "Thank you," he said without turning, "for making her happy, for making this house feel less empty." Clara joined him at the rail. "She's easy to love. Her mother used to say that." He glanced at her. "You're nothing like Margaret. You know, she was delicate, ethereal, like she might blow away in a strong wind. And I'm too solid to budge." "That's not a criticism," His voice was thoughtful. June needs solid. We both do. They stood in comfortable silence, watching lightning flash across the mountains. Clara felt something shifting between them, slow and careful like ice breaking up in spring. The shed's working well, Wyatt said eventually. Your idea was good. Our idea, Clara corrected. June and I together. You're good together, natural. He turned to face her fully. I wanted to ask, that is, if you're willing, would you consider taking on more, not just June's care and your sewing, but helping with the household accounts Margaret used to manage them? And I'm making a hash of it. Clara blinked. It was a significant increase in responsibility, in trust. If you think I'm capable, I know you are. You've brought order to everything you've touched here. He paused. The pay would increase accordingly. Of course. Then yes, I'd be honored. Wyatt nodded, relief flickering across his features. Good. That's good. He bid her good night and went inside. But Clara lingered on the porch. The storm was passing, leaving the air clean and full of promise. In her shed, their shed fabric waited to be transformed. In the house, a child slept peacefully, and a man was learning to share his burdens. It wasn't the life Clara had imagined when she'd stepped off that train. It was something altogether unexpected, a patchwork family held together by careful stitches and growing trust. Like her mending work, it wasn't about making things look new. It was about making them strong enough to last. The last rumble of thunder faded into the distance. Clara smiled and went inside, ready to continue the slow, patient work of helping this family heal, one day at a time. The late spring afternoon brought an unwelcome visitor to the Callan ranch. Clara was in the vegetable garden with June, teaching her to distinguish weeds from the young bean plants, when she heard horses approaching. Two riders appeared on the road, one she recognized as Tom Morrison, Sarah's husband. The other made her blood run cold. Dr. Jonathan Ward sat his horse with the pompous air of a man convinced of his own importance. He dismounted at the front porch as if he owned the place, his medical bag prominent at his side. June, Clara said quietly. Go find your father. He's in the barn. The child hesitated, clearly sensing Clara's tension. Go on, sweetheart, quickly now. June ran off, her bare feet kicking up dust. Clara stood slowly, brushing soil from her apron, and walked to meet the visitors. Mr. Morrison, she acknowledged. Dr. Ward. Tom Morrison had the grace to look uncomfortable. Afternoon. Miss Reed. The doc here insisted I show him the way. Said it was official business. What business could you possibly have here? Clara kept her voice level, though anger simmered beneath. Doctor, Ward produced a folded paper from his coat. A petition, Miss Reed, signed by several concerned citizens regarding the welfare of the Callan child. Concerned citizens? Clara's hands clenched in her skirts. Or gossips with nothing better to do? Respected members of the community, Ward corrected sharply. Mrs. Thornberry, Mrs. Davies, Mr. Phillips from the bank, all worried about a motherless child in an irregular household arrangement. Tom Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Now, Doc, I told you Wyatt runs a respectable home. With an unmarried woman living on the premises, a child who refuses to speak. Ward's eyes glittered with self-righteousness. It's my medical opinion that the girl needs proper evaluation, perhaps treatment at the state institution in Denver. Over my dead body. Wyatt's voice came from behind Clara, cold as winter wind. He stood with June clutched in his arms, her face buried against his shoulder. His expression could have been carved from granite. Ward puffed up. Be reasonable. Callan, the child is clearly disturbed. The only disturbance here is your presence. Wyatt set June down gently. Go inside. Bug, help Mrs. Aldrich with the bread. June looked between the adults, her eyes wide with fear. She grabbed Clara's hand, trying to pull her along. "It's all right," Clara assured her. "Go on, I'll be there soon." Reluctantly, June obeyed. Once she was inside, Wyatt stepped forward, placing himself between the house and the visitors. "Tom, I'm surprised at you, bringing this snake to my door." Morrison flushed. "He said it was official. Wyatt, that I had to—" "You had to do nothing." Wyatt's gaze never left Ward's face. "Show me this petition." Ward handed it over with a smirk. Wyatt read it, his jaw tightening with each line. Unsuitable living conditions, questionable moral arrangements, mental deficiency. He looked up. "You dare put such filth in writing about my daughter?" "It's for her own good. It's for your wounded pride." Clara stepped forward, unable to remain silent. "You can't bear that I rejected your suit, so you attack a child instead." Ward's face mottled. "You flatter yourself, Miss Reed. This is about the welfare of a disturbed child, nothing more." "Then why didn't you show such concern in the year before I arrived?" Clara challenged. "June's been mute since her mother's death, yet you never once petitioned then." "The situation has deteriorated." "The situation has improved," Tom Morrison interrupted, finding his courage. "Everyone can see that. The girl's happier than she's been in months. She's learning, working in that sewing shed, even helping customers with gestures and notes." "Tricks," Ward dismissed. "A truly healthy child would speak." "My daughter will speak when she's ready." Wyatt's voice was deadly quiet. "And when she does, it won't be to the likes of you." Ward drew himself up. "The petition gives me the right to examine the child, to determine if intervention is necessary. The petition gives you the right to leave my property before I help you along." Wyatt crumpled the paper and threw it at Ward's feet. "Get out! Don't come back! And if you so much as look at my daughter again, you'll need your own medical services." Threats. Callan, in front of a witness. Tom Morrison cleared his throat. "I didn't hear any threats, Doc, just a father protecting his family." Ward looked between them, perhaps finally understanding he'd overplayed his hand. "This isn't over. The town council..." "The town council includes my brother-in-law and 2 men who owe their livelihoods to my horse contracts," Wyatt said flatly. "Would you like to test their loyalty to you against their good sense?" Defeated, but not gracious. Ward mounted his horse with stiff movements. "You're making a mistake. Callan, that child needs professional help, not the coddling of a hired woman with pretensions." Clara felt Wyatt tense beside her. She placed a calming hand on his arm. "The only mistake," she said clearly, "was believing you were any kind of healer. A true doctor helps. You only harm." Ward's face went purple. Without another word, he spurred his horse down the road. Tom Morrison lingered, hat in hand. "I'm sorry. Wyatt, he said he had legal papers, that I was obligated." "You weren't to know." Some of the tension left Wyatt's shoulders. "Ward's been a thorn in my side since Margaret died. Keeps insisting June needs to be institutionalized. Sarah will be furious when she hears. She'd have sent him packing with a flea in his ear." Tom mounted his horse. "For what it's worth, everyone I talk to says Miss Reed's been a godsend. Don't let the old biddies and Ward poison the well." After Tom left, Wyatt stood staring down the empty road. Clara watched him, seeing the weight he carried in the rigid line of his shoulders. "He won't give up," Wyatt said finally. "Ward holds grudges like a miser holds gold. Then we'll be ready for him." Wyatt turned to her, something vulnerable in his expression. Did you think I'd abandon June because of a petty man's threats?" Clara lifted her chin. "I've faced worse than Jonathan Ward." "Have you?" It wasn't a challenge, just quiet curiosity. Clara looked away. "We all have our histories. Mr. Callan." "Wyatt," he corrected automatically. "And perhaps someday you'll trust me with yours." Before Clara could respond, June burst through the door and flew to her father's arms. Her face was streaked with tears. her small body shaking. "Oh, Bug!" Wyatt held her close. "He's gone. He can't hurt you." June pulled back, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Her face contorted with effort, and for a moment Clara thought she might actually speak. Instead, a strangled sound emerged before June pressed her face back against Wyatt's chest. "It's all right," he soothed. "There's no rush. Your voice will come when it's ready." But Clara saw the defeat in his eyes, the fear that Ward's threats had set back June's progress. She made a decision. "June," she said firmly, "look at me." The child peeked out from her father's embrace. "That man is a bully. Do you know what bullies fear most?" June shook her head. "They fear people who won't be bullied, who stand strong despite their cruel words." Clara knelt to June's level. "You're stronger than he is. Your silence doesn't make you weak or broken. It makes you careful with your words, saving them for when they truly matter." June studied her with those solemn brown eyes. Then she held out her arms. Clara gathered her close, feeling the child's heart racing against her chest. "Why don't we make something beautiful?" Clara suggested. "Chase away the ugliness with creation. Your mother's blue silk is waiting." June nodded eagerly. Even Wyatt managed a small smile. "I'll be in the barn if you need me." But he paused at the door. "Clara, thank you for standing up to him, for standing with us." The words warmed her more than summer sun. "Always," she promised. In the sewing shed, June's mood improved as they worked with the precious blue silk. Clara had sketched a simple but elegant design, a dress June could grow into, with deep hems and adjustable seams. "Your mother chose beautiful fabric," Clara said, guiding June's hands as they cut the pattern. "She must have dreamed of making this for you." June touched the silk reverently, then pointed to Clara, herself, and made a sewing motion. "Yes, we're making it together now. I think she'd be happy about that." They worked in companionable silence, the familiar rhythm of cutting and pinning soothing them both. When Mrs. Aldrich called them for supper, June carefully folded the silk pieces and placed them in a special box. At dinner, Wyatt joined them, a new development since the storm night. He still said little, but his presence at the table made June visibly happier. "Ward won't let this go," he said eventually, pushing food around his plate. "He's got influence in town, makes house calls, delivers babies. People listen to him. Then we'll give them something else to see." Clara said, "June's progress. The work we're doing. Actions speak louder than petitions." "You make it sound simple." "Not simple, but possible." Clara met his gaze. "I've been thinking, what if we hosted a small gathering, show the town that this is a proper household, that June is thriving?" Wyatt looked skeptical. "Margaret used to host teas and such." "I wouldn't know where to begin." "I would. Nothing elaborate afternoon tea. Perhaps display some of June's needlework. Let people see her interact with guests. See how well she's doing." "And see you," Wyatt said quietly. The respectable governess maintaining a proper household. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "If that helps protect June, yes." June, following the conversation with bright eyes, suddenly stood and ran to the sewing shed. She returned with a sampler she'd been working on, careful cross-stitch letters spelling out "home" with flowers around the border. "You want to show this?" Clara asked. June nodded emphatically, then pointed to the parlor. "She wants to hang it," Wyatt interpreted, "like Margaret used to display her work." "Then we shall, and we'll invite the ladies to see it, along with our other projects." Clara smiled at June. "They'll see what Dr. Ward refuses to a talented, intelligent girl who just happens to speak with her hands instead of her voice." Over the next days, they prepared for the tea. Clara sent invitations to carefully chosen guests. Sarah Morrison, of course, but also the minister's wife, the schoolteacher, and several mothers with young daughters. She deliberately included Mrs. Thornberry, gambling that the woman's curiosity would override her disapproval. Wyatt watched the preparations with bemusement. "You're declaring war with tea cakes and doilies." "The strongest battles are sometimes fought with sugar instead of swords," Clara replied, teaching June to arrange flowers. "Your daughter's future is worth fighting for." The day of the tea arrived gray and threatening rain. Clara worried guests might use weather as an excuse to stay away, but by 2 o'clock, the parlor was respectably full. Even Mrs. Thornberry had come, her pinched face ready to find fault. June wore her new blue silk dress, not quite finished, but beautiful nonetheless. She stood beside Clara, greeting each guest with a curtsy and a smile. If her silence bothered anyone, they were too polite to mention it. "My goodness," the schoolteacher, Miss Bennet, exclaimed over June's sampler. "Such precise work for such young fingers." June beamed, pointing to Clara with obvious pride. "Miss Reed has been teaching her," Wyatt said from his position by the door. He'd insisted on being present, though Clara could see the social gathering made him uncomfortable. June's proved an apt pupil. "Indeed," Mrs. Thornberry sniffed, examining the needlework with a critical eye. "Though I wonder if such focus on feminine crafts is appropriate when the child should be working on recovering her speech." The room went still. June's face fell, and she pressed closer to Clara's side. "Mrs. Thornberry," Clara said pleasantly, "would you say that writing is a form of communication?" "Naturally, but—" "And would you agree that art can express feelings words cannot?" "I suppose. However, then surely you can see that June is learning to communicate beautifully through her needlework. Each stitch is a word, each pattern a sentence. She's telling stories with thread instead of sound." Miss Bennet clapped her hands. "Oh, how beautifully put, like a visual vocabulary." "Exactly." Clara smiled down at June. "Would you show Miss Bennet your work journal?" June fetched a small bound book where she'd been recording her progress sketches of stitches, notes about color combinations, even little drawings showing her mood while working on different pieces. "This is remarkable," Miss Bennet breathed. "She's creating her own language of symbols and images. I've read about similar techniques being used in progressive schools back east." The conversation shifted, guests examining June's work with new appreciation. Several mothers asked if Clara might teach their daughters, and Mrs. Thornberry found herself outnumbered in her disapproval. As the guests prepared to leave, June did something unexpected. She approached Mrs. Thornberry with a small wrapped package. The older woman looked startled as June presented it with a curtsy. "For me, Mrs." Thornberry unwrapped it carefully, revealing a delicate handkerchief embroidered with forget-me-nots. In one corner, June had stitched M.C., Margaret Callan's initials. "Oh," the stern woman's face softened. "This was Margaret's pattern. She made one just like it for my birthday years ago." June nodded, pointing first to the handkerchief, then to her heart, then to Mrs. Thornberry. "She's saying her mother lives on in the stitches," Clara translated softly. "That when we create something with love, we keep memories alive." Mrs. Thornberry's eyes misted. "Well, Thank you, child. It's beautifully done." After the guests departed, Wyatt found Clara and June in the kitchen, washing teacups. "That was masterful," he said. "You turned Ward's biggest supporter into an ally." "June did that," Clara corrected. "I just gave her the opportunity." June tugged at her father's sleeve, then pointed to the parlor where her sampler now hung beside her mother's work. "Yes, Bug, I see. Your mother's wall is becoming yours too." He lifted her into his arms. "She'd be so proud." June laid her head on his shoulder, content, over her dark curls. Wyatt's eyes met Clara's. "Stay," he said quietly. "Whatever Ward threatens, whatever the town gossips say, this is your home now. Both of you need that security. Clara felt her throat tighten. As long as you'll have me. Forever, then, he said simply. And Clara couldn't tell if he meant it as employer to governess or something more. Later that evening, as rain finally began to fall, Clara found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside, in Wyatt's careful script, "Misread Clara. The house hasn't felt this alive since Margaret's best days. You've given June back her smile and her purpose. You've given me hope that our future needn't be shadowed by our past. Whatever comes, know that you have a place here. Yours in gratitude. Wyatt." Clara pressed the letter to her chest, feeling the walls she'd built around her heart crack just a little. Outside, thunder rumbled, but the house stood strong against the storm. Like June's careful stitches, they were binding together into something new, not replacing what was lost, but creating space for what might grow. In her room that had once been Margaret's sanctuary, Clara began planning new lessons for June. Ward and his petitions felt very far away. Here, in this house where grief was slowly giving way to hope, they were building something stronger than any threat could break. The first winter storm caught them unprepared. November had been mild, lulling them into complacency, but December arrived with teeth. Clara woke to find frost patterns on her window and her breath visible in the air. She dressed quickly, layering wool over flannel, and hurried to the kitchen to start the stove. Wyatt was already there, feeding wood into the firebox. "Pipes are near frozen," he said without preamble. "I'll need to wrap them before they burst." "What can I do?" He glanced at her, seeming surprised by the question. "Keep June warm. This kind of cold is hard on her. She was born during a storm like this." Clara understood the unspoken worry. Cold like this had accompanied Margaret's death. "I'll keep her occupied." June appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a quilt but still shivering. Her lips had a blue tinge that made Clara's heart clench. Without hesitation, Clara scooped the child up and carried her to the big chair by the stove. "Let's get you warm, sweetheart." She held June close, rubbing her arms and back to encourage circulation. The child burrowed against her, seeking heat and comfort. Clara began humming old songs her mother had sung during prairie winters when the wind howled like wolves. Wyatt returned with an armload of wood, snow dusting his shoulders. He stopped short at the sight of them curled together in the chair. Something flickered across his face, longing, perhaps, or memory. "The pipes are wrapped," he said roughly. "Should hold if the temperature doesn't drop more." June reached out a hand toward him, gesturing for him to come closer. When he hesitated, she made a small, impatient sound, the first vocalization Clara had heard from her in weeks. "She wants you to join us," Clara said softly. "There's room." Wyatt looked torn between desire and propriety. The wind chose that moment to rattle the windows, sending drafts through every crack. June shivered again, and that decided him. He pulled a footstool close and sat, not quite touching them, but near enough that June could reach him. She immediately grabbed his hand with one of hers while keeping the other firmly gripped on Clara's sleeve. "Your hands are freezing," Clara said, noticing his fingers were nearly as blue as June's lips had been. "Forgot my gloves." He started to pull away, but June held tight. Without overthinking it, Clara shifted June slightly and reached for Wyatt's free hand. "We can't have you getting frostbite." His hand was like ice, rough with calluses but gentle as she chafed warmth back into his fingers. He went very still, watching her ministrations with an unreadable expression. "Margaret used to do that," he said quietly. "During storms, she'd insist on warming my hands after chores." Clara paused, uncertain if the memory brought pain or comfort. "Would you prefer I didn't?" "No." His fingers curled slightly around hers. "It's nice, familiar, but different." June, satisfied that her two people were close and getting warm, relaxed between them. Her eyelids grew heavy as the kitchen warmed. Soon she was breathing evenly, safe in sleep. "I should put her to bed." Wyatt said, but made no move to do so. Let her rest. The warmth is good for her. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the wind and the crack of wood in the stove. Clara became intensely aware of every point of contact, June's weight against her chest, Wyatt's hand still loosely held in hers. When had such simple touch become so significant? I've been thinking, Wyatt said eventually, about Christmas. Margaret always made such a production of its special foods, decorations, presents for everyone on the ranch. Last year, we barely marked the day. And this year, June deserves better. She deserves traditions and joy, not a father who can't see past his own grief. He looked at Clara. Would you help? I don't even know where to begin. Of course. Clara squeezed his hand gently before releasing it. What were Margaret's traditions? We could honor some while creating new ones. Wyatt's smile was sad but genuine. She always insisted on a tree, a small pine we'd decorate with paper stars and strings of berries. Christmas Eve, she'd read the nativity story while June played with a wooden creche set. And cookies. Lord, so many cookies. Then we'll do all of that. June and I can make decorations, and I'm sure Mrs. Aldrich knows Margaret's cookie recipes. You do that, follow her traditions. Why wouldn't I? They're June's traditions too. She should have that connection to her mother. Wyatt studied her face. Most women in your position would want to establish their own ways, not follow in another's footsteps. I'm not in competition with Margaret's memory, Clara said firmly. I'm just trying to help June and you find happiness again. Something shifted in his expression, a softening that made her breath catch. You're remarkable. Clara Reed. Before she could respond, June stirred, mumbling something unintelligible. They both leaned in, hoping for words, but she only sighed and settled again. She's trying, Clara said. I hear her sometimes in the sewing room, making sounds like she's practicing. It's just not ready to come out yet. The doctor said, Wyatt caught himself. Not Ward, a specialist from Denver I consulted last spring. He said the trauma might have created a physical block, that forcing her to speak could make it worse. Then we won't force. We'll just keep loving her and waiting. Wyatt repeated softly. I like the sound of that. The storm continued through the night. Clara insisted Wyatt sleep in the parlor rather than trying to reach his bedroom upstairs. The house was too cold away from the kitchen stove. She made up the sofa for him, then carried June to her small bed, piling on extra quilts. In the morning, they woke to a world transformed. Snow had drifted halfway up the windows, and icicles hung like crystal spears from the eaves. But inside was warm, and June's delight at the winter wonderland was worth any discomfort. Over the following weeks, they prepared for Christmas with growing excitement. June threw herself into making decorations, cutting paper snowflakes with intense concentration and stringing dried berries with nimble fingers. The house began to transform, taking on a festive air it hadn't seen in 2 years. Wyatt participated more than Clara had expected. He brought in a perfect little pine tree, its branches evenly spaced for decorating. He helped June hang her paper stars, lifting her high to reach the top branches. In the evenings, he even joined them in the parlor, reading aloud while they worked on presents. One such evening, as Clara hemmed a new shirt for Wyatt June's gift to her father, though he pretended not to know, she became aware of his voice faltering. She looked up to find him staring at her with an odd expression. What is it? Nothing, just... He gestured vaguely. You look comfortable there, natural, like you've always been part of this. Clara felt warmth bloom in her chest. I feel that way too. June, who had been drawing at the table, suddenly stood and walked to the small piano in the corner, an instrument that had sat untouched since Margaret's death. She placed her hands on the dusty keys but didn't press them. Would you like to hear it played? Clara asked gently. June turned, her face hopeful but uncertain. She pointed to Clara, then the piano. I'm afraid I don't play. My education didn't include such refinements. Wyatt cleared his throat. I do, or did, Margaret taught me. He looked at the piano like it might bite. I haven't touched it since. June ran to him, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the instrument. Her meaning was clear play for me. Papa. Wyatt sat reluctantly on the bench, June climbing up beside him. His hands hovered over the keys for a long moment before finally descending into a simple melody. The notes were rusty at first, but muscle memory took over, and soon a gentle Christmas carol filled the room. Clara watched them, father and daughter, side by side, making music in a house that had been silent too long. June swayed with the rhythm, her face peaceful. When Wyatt finished, she clapped soundlessly, then pointed to the keys and to herself. You want to learn? Wyatt's voice was thick. All right, Bug. Here, put your fingers like this. As he guided June through simple notes, Clara felt like an intruder on something precious. She started to leave, but June's hand shot out, catching her skirt. The child pulled until Clara sat on June's other side, squished onto the small bench. Apparently you're having a lesson too, Wyatt said. And was that amusement in his voice? The three of them crowded together, June in the middle, determinedly teaching Clara which keys to press. It was ridiculous and wonderful. And when June suddenly giggled a bright, tinkling sound, both adults froze. June, Wyatt breathed. The child clapped her hand over her mouth, eyes wide with surprise at the sound she'd made. Then, deliberately, she giggled again, louder this time. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Oh, sweetheart, what a beautiful sound. June beamed, pressing random keys in her excitement. The discordant noise should have been jarring, but to Clara it sounded like celebration. Wyatt pulled June into his arms, holding her tight, over her head. His eyes met Clara's, bright with unshed tears. She laughed. She actually laughed. She did. Clara touched June's back gently. Maybe the music helped unlock something. June squirmed free and returned to the keys, playing the simple pattern Wyatt had taught her with intense concentration. No more sounds came, but the silence felt different now, expectant rather than trapped. Christmas Eve arrived crisp and clear. They attended church in town, June wearing her finished blue silk dress and Clara in her best wool. Wyatt had surprised them both with new cloaks, practical but beautiful, with silver clasps shaped like stars. You shouldn't have spent so much, Clara protested. It's Christmas, he said simply, and you've both more than earned them. During the service, June stood between them, holding both their hands. When the congregation began singing Silent Night, June swayed with the music, her mouth moving as if she were singing along in her mind. Back home, they gathered in the parlor for Margaret's traditional Christmas Eve reading. Wyatt had found the old wooden creche, and June arranged the figures carefully while he read the nativity story. Clara watched from her chair, feeling both part of and separate from this family tradition. Then June did something unexpected. She picked up the figure of Mary and brought it to Clara, placing it in her hands with a solemn ceremony. The message was clear: you belong in our story too. Thank you, sweetheart, Clara whispered. After June was in bed, a process prolonged by excitement and multiple requests for one more hug, Clara and Wyatt sat by the dying fire. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, the cookies they'd baked that afternoon. This was perfect, Wyatt said quietly. I didn't think I could do Christmas again, but you made it possible. We made it possible, all three of us. He turned to look at her fully. Clara, I need to say something. These past months, you've brought life back to this house, to June, to me. He paused, seeming to gather courage. I hired you as a governess, but you've become so much more. A crash from upstairs interrupted him. They both jumped up, racing to June's room. They found her sitting up in bed, pointing at the window where a tree branch heavy with snow, had broken and hit the glass. "Just a branch," Wyatt soothed. "No harm done." June's mouth opened and closed, clearly trying to speak, her face scrunched with effort. And finally, in a whisper so soft they almost missed it, came Papa. Wyatt went absolutely still. "What did you say, bug?" June took a deep breath, her little chest expanding with determination. "Papa," she said again, clearer this time. Then, turning to Clara, "Mama." The word hung in the air like a question, like hope, like a gift better than any wrapped present under the tree. Clara's vision blurred. "Oh, June, sweet girl." June held out her arms, and Clara didn't hesitate. She gathered the child close, feeling Wyatt's arms come around them both. They stayed that way, a tight knot of joy and tears and breakthrough. "Best Christmas ever," Wyatt murmured against Clara's hair. And she couldn't disagree. Later, after June had been coaxed back to sleep with promises that her voice would still be there in the morning, Clara and Wyatt returned to the parlor. The fire had died to embers, but neither moved to add wood. "She called you Mama," Wyatt said carefully. "I know. Should I correct her? Do you want to—" Clara considered. "No, if she wants to call me that, I'm honored." "Good." Wyatt took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Because I've been trying all evening to tell you you're not just June's governess anymore. You're family, our family, if you'll have us. If—" Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Wyatt, I know it's only been months. I know you came here for a different life entirely. But Clara, He stopped, started again. "I'm falling in love with you. Have been for weeks, maybe longer. And if you could see your way to feeling the same—" She silenced him by squeezing his hand. "I already do. Love you both. I mean, so much it frightens me sometimes." His smile transformed his face, years of grief falling away. "Then stay, not as governess, but as my wife, June's mother, if you'll have us," he repeated. "Yes," Clara said simply. "Yes to all of it." He kissed her then, gentle and sure, while snow fell softly outside and the embers glowed their blessing. When they finally parted, both were smiling like children. "June's going to be insufferable," Wyatt warned. "She's been plotting this for months." Clara laughed, remembering all the times June had pulled them together, forced them to share spaces and moments. "Our little matchmaker." "Our daughter," Wyatt corrected softly. "If you're willing." "More than willing. Grateful. Blessed." Clara touched his face. "I came here expecting nothing and found everything." They talked long into the night, making plans, sharing dreams, and upstairs, June slept peacefully, her voice finally free, her family finally whole. Sunday service at Timber Hollow's small church had never been comfortable for Clara, but this particular morning carried an electric tension that made her skin prickle. She sat in the Callan family pew, June between her and Wyatt, trying to focus on Reverend Morrison's sermon about forgiveness and community. The whispers had started the moment they'd entered. Clara kept her eyes forward, her hand steady on June's shoulder, but she could feel the weight of dozens of gazes. "Papa?" June whispered she'd been practicing her newly returned voice constantly for 3 days now. "Why is everyone looking?" "Hush, bug," Wyatt murmured. "Listen to the Reverend." But Clara knew why they were looking. News of June speaking again and what she'd called Clara had spread through Timber Hollow like wildfire. Some faces showed joy at the child's recovery. Others, particularly among the older women, displayed disapproval sharp enough to cut. After the service, as they filed out, Mrs. Thornberry stepped directly into their path. Her thin face was set in lines of righteous determination. "Mr. Callan," she said, ignoring Clara entirely. "I'm delighted to hear June has found her voice again. The Lord works miracles indeed." "Yes, He does, Wyatt agreed carefully. Though I must say, Mrs. Thornberry continued, her voice carrying deliberately, I find it troubling what the child has been taught to call certain people. Her dear mother must be turning in her grave. Clara felt Wyatt tense beside her, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the morning air. Judge not Mrs. Thornberry, lest ye be judged. Sarah Morrison stood behind them, her usually cheerful face stern. Seems to me that Clara Reed has done more for that child in 6 months than all our prayers and sympathy did in a year. If June wants to call her Mama, that's between the child and the good Lord. The proprieties, Mrs. Thornberry began. The proprieties. Tom Morrison interrupted, joining his wife. Say that a child needs love and care. Miss Reed provides both in abundance. Other voices joined in, some supporting, others murmuring about appropriate boundaries and respect for the dead. Clara felt June pressing closer to her side, the child's newfound voice retreating in the face of conflict. Enough, Clara spoke quietly, but something in her tone cut through the chatter. She looked directly at Mrs. Thornberry. You speak of Margaret Callan as if I'm trying to erase her. Nothing could be further from the truth. June and I work with her mother's materials, following her patterns. We tend her garden, play her piano, keep her memory alive in a dozen ways every day. Pretty words, Mrs. Thornberry sniffed. But actions, my actions. Clara straightened to her full height. I've helped a grieving child find her voice again. I've brought laughter back to a house that was dying of silence. If that offends you, then perhaps you should examine your own heart rather than judging mine. She took June's hand and walked away, leaving stunned silence in her wake. Wyatt followed quickly, and she could feel his approval even without looking. They'd almost reached their wagon when Dr. Ward appeared, as if he'd been lying in wait. Quite a performance. Miss Reed, he said silkily. Though I wonder how long this charade can continue. It's no charade, Wyatt said flatly. June is speaking again. She's happy. What more proof do you need that Clara belongs with us? Ward's smile was unpleasant. Oh, I don't doubt the child's attachment. Children can be taught to say anything, after all. But what happens when Miss Reed tires of playing house, when a better opportunity presents itself? That won't happen, Clara said firmly. Won't it, a young woman with no ties, no real investment here beyond a salary? Ward shook his head with false sympathy. I've seen it before. Vulnerable families taken advantage of by those who prey on grief. How dare you, Wyatt started, but Clara placed a calming hand on his arm. Dr. Ward, she said evenly. I understand you're angry about my rejection of your suit. But taking that anger out on an innocent child and her father is beneath even you. Ward's face flushed. This has nothing to do with Doesn't it? Clara stepped closer, her voice low but fierce. You showed no concern for June until I arrived. Your sudden interest in her welfare coincided exactly with my refusing your proposal. Everyone can see through your transparent motivations. I am a respected member of this community. You're a bitter man who can't accept that a woman chose independence over your company, Clara interrupted. And if you continue to harass this family, I'll make sure everyone in Timber Hollow knows exactly why. Ward's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Around them, Clara realized, a crowd had gathered again, churchgoers drawn by the confrontation. Many nodded approvingly at her words. Come, she said to Wyatt and June. We have Sunday dinner to prepare. As they drove away, June piped up from her seat between them. Mama was brave, she said, her voice still soft but growing stronger. Like in David and Goliath. Wyatt chuckled despite the tension. She was indeed. Bug. Though I think Dr. Ward makes a poor Goliath. More like the Pharisees, Clara muttered, then caught herself. I shouldn't have lost my temper. It doesn't help our situation. It helps more than you know. Wyatt glanced at her. People respect strength. You showed them you're not some opportunist. You're a woman who'll fight for this family." "Our family," June corrected, then beamed at her own boldness. That evening, after June was in bed, Clara found herself restless. The confrontation at church had shaken her more than she'd admitted. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch, needing the cold air to clear her head. Wyatt joined her moments later, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Thought you might need this." "Thank you." She accepted the warm cup gratefully. "I'm sorry about today. I should have handled it better." "You handled it perfectly." He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you. About Margaret, about why some people react so strongly to you being here." Clara waited, sensing this was important. "I told you she had difficulties after June's birth. What I didn't say was there were rumors, ugly ones, about her mental state, about whether she was fit to be a mother." His voice grew rough. "Some people said I should send her away, to an asylum. Mrs. Thornberry was one of the loudest voices." "Oh, Wyatt." "I refused, of course. Margaret wasn't insane, she was struggling. But the gossip hurt her deeply. She became more withdrawn, more desperate to prove she was a good wife and mother. That's partly why she wanted another child so badly, to show them all she could do it." Understanding dawned on Clara. "And now they see me succeeding where they think she failed." "It's not that simple. You're not competing with her, I know that. But some people—" He trailed off. "They'd rather believe June's silence was proof of Margaret's failure than accept that sometimes tragedy just happens. And my presence challenges their narrative." "Exactly." He turned to face her. "I need you to know I will never let them drive you away. Not Ward, not Mrs. Thornberry, not anyone. You've brought life back to this family. June loves you. I love you." The words hung in the cold air between them, warming Clara more than the coffee. "I love you too," she said softly. "Both of you. That's why I'll fight anyone who tries to tear us apart." Wyatt set down his cup and drew her close. "I've been thinking about what you said at church, about June calling you Mama. Are you truly all right with it?" "More than all right. Honored. Blessed." Clara leaned into his warmth. "I know I can't replace Margaret, and I wouldn't want to, but maybe I can be another kind of mother to June, one who builds on the foundation Margaret laid." "She would have liked you," Wyatt said quietly. "In her clear moments, she worried so much about June's future. She'd be grateful to know our daughter has you." "Our daughter," Clara repeated, tasting the words. "I like the sound of that." "Then let's make it official. Marry me, Clara, soon, before Ward or anyone else can find new ways to interfere." Clara pulled back to look at him. "You want to move quickly because of them?" "No." His eyes were steady on hers. "I want to move quickly because every day I wake up afraid you'll realize you could do better than a grieving widower and his damaged daughter. I want you to be my wife, June's legal mother, before you come to your senses." "Oh, Wyatt." Clara touched his face. "I came to my senses the day I took this position. Everything before was just wandering. This is home. Then marry me. This week, if Reverend Morrison will perform the ceremony." "This week," Clara laughed. But she was tempted. What will people say? Let them say what they will. We've been living properly, with witnesses to attest to it. June needs the security of knowing you're legally her mother. And he paused. "I need to know you're mine, that no amount of gossip or pressure can separate us." Clara considered. A rushed wedding would certainly cause talk, but would a long engagement be any better? The gossips would find fault regardless. "All right," she decided. "This week, but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, June stands with us. This is her day too, the day she officially gains a mother." "Of course." "Second, we invite everyone, even Mrs. Thornberry and Dr. Ward. Let them see this is real, not some shameful secret. Wyatt grimaced. If you insist. And third, Clara smiled. I want to wear Margaret's wedding dress, if it still exists. Let everyone see I'm not trying to erase her, but to honor what came before while building something new. Wyatt's throat worked. It's in the attic, packed away. Are you sure? Very sure. June should see that her two mothers can exist in harmony, even if one is only in memory. You really are remarkable. Wyatt kissed her softly. Wednesday. Then that gives us 3 days to prepare. Wednesday, Clara agreed. The next morning, they told June their plans over breakfast. The child's squeal of delight probably woke the horses in the barn. A wedding, a real wedding, and I get to stand with you. Of course you do, Clara assured her. You're the reason we found each other. June's face glowed. Can I wear my blue dress, the one we made from Mama's fabric? I think that would be perfect. The child chattered excitedly about flowers and cake until Wyatt reminded her they had chores. Even then, she skipped to the chicken coop, her recovered voice rising in a happy song about weddings and mamas and papas. News of the impending wedding spread through Timber Hollow with predictable speed. By Tuesday, Clara couldn't visit the general store without being stopped by well-wishers or concerned citizens. Awfully quick, Mrs. Davies commented while measuring out flour. Some might say unseemly. Some might, Clara agreed calmly. Others might say two people who love each other and are already living as family should make it official, especially when there's a child's happiness to consider. Miss Bennett, the school teacher, overheard and joined them. I think it's wonderful. June deserves a complete family, and anyone can see how you've all bloomed together. But the proprieties, hang the proprieties, Miss Bennett said firmly. Love matters more than waiting periods. That evening, Clara and June carefully unpacked Margaret's wedding dress. It was beautiful ivory silk with delicate lace and pearl buttons, a bit shorter than ideal for Clara's height, but the style allowed for alterations. It's pretty, June breathed, touching the silk reverently. Mama looked like a princess. She did, Clara agreed, studying a photograph Wyatt had provided. And she'd want it worn again, bringing joy instead of sitting in darkness. As she altered the dress, adding length with a complementary fabric, adjusting the bodice, Clara felt Margaret's presence, not as a rival or a ghost to be placated, but as a woman who'd loved this family and would want them happy. Wednesday dawned bright and cold. The church was fuller than Clara had expected curiosity, perhaps, or genuine goodwill. She couldn't tell and didn't care. All that mattered was Wyatt waiting at the altar, June beside him holding a bouquet of dried flowers from her mother's garden. Sarah Morrison helped Clara with the dress, tears in her eyes. You look beautiful and brave. Not many women would take this on. It's not bravery. Clara said, it's love, the easiest choice I've ever made. The ceremony was simple. Reverend Morrison spoke about new beginnings and the resilience of love. June stood between them, beaming. When it came time for vows, Clara spoke clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the church. I promise to love and cherish not just you, Wyatt, but the family we're building together. I promise to honor what came before while creating something new. I promise to be a mother to June in all ways, and to any children we may be blessed with. I promise to stand strong against any storm, knowing that together we are unbreakable. Wyatt's eyes were suspiciously bright as he made his own vows, and when Reverend Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, June threw her arms around them both, her finally making the congregation laugh. As they turned to face their community as a married couple, Clara caught Dr. Ward's sour expression and Mrs. Thornberry's pinched face, but she also saw Sarah's joy, Tom Morrison's approving nod, Miss Bennett's tears, and dozens of other faces showing acceptance and celebration. Mama, June said, tugging Clara's hand, Can we go home now? I want to show everyone I have a mama and papa again. Yes, sweetheart, Clara said, her heart full. Let's go home. As they walked down the aisle, Clara felt the weight of her new role settling around her like a warm cloak. Wife, mother, partner, protector. She'd come to Timber Hollow as a rejected mail-order bride. She was leaving this church as the cornerstone of a rebuilt family. Outside, snow began to fall softly, blessing their new beginning. And somewhere in the church behind them, even Mrs. Thornberry was heard to murmur, "Well, perhaps it's for the best after all." The late afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, casting golden light across the flour-dusted table where Clara was teaching June to make bread. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and the rhythm of their life together had settled into something comfortable yet vibrant. "Press harder, sweetheart," Clara encouraged, guiding June's small hands as they kneaded the dough. "Feel how it changes under your palms." June nodded, concentration furrowing her brow. "It's like fabric," she said, her voice stronger now with daily use. "But alive." "That's exactly right." Clara smiled at the comparison. "Trust June to relate everything to sewing." The kitchen door opened, bringing a gust of spring air, and Wyatt, who'd been helping repair the Morrisons' barn roof. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene, his wife and daughter covered in flour, laughing over their bread-making. "Should I ask why there's more flour on you two than in the dough?" "Papa," June ran to him, leaving floury handprints on his work shirt. "We're making Mama Clara's special honey bread." "Mama Clara," he repeated softly, still seeming wonderstruck by the title even after months. "Well then, I can't wait to taste it." As June chattered about their afternoon, Clara watched Wyatt listening with patient attention. The change in him still caught her sometimes, the way harsh lines had softened. How readily he smiled now, how he'd stopped eating alone and started sharing every meal with them. "Why don't you wash up?" Clara suggested to June. "The dough needs to rise, and we should work on your sampler before supper." June scampered off, leaving them alone in the warm kitchen. Wyatt moved closer, brushing flour from Clara's cheek with gentle fingers. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "Beyond words," she replied, leaning into his touch. "Even with," he gestured vaguely toward town, where gossip still occasionally bubbled about their quick marriage. "Especially with," Clara said firmly. "Let them talk. We know the truth of what we have." He kissed her forehead, then noticed an envelope on the table. "What's this?" Clara's stomach tightened slightly. "A letter from Denver, from my past." Wyatt's eyebrows rose. In all their months together, Clara had shared little about her life before Timber Hollow. He'd respected her privacy, just as she'd respected his need to grieve Margaret at his own pace. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked carefully. Clara picked up the envelope, weighing it in her hands. "My younger sister, half-sister. Actually, I haven't heard from her in 3 years." "You have family," June had returned, catching the last words. "A sister." Clara pulled June onto her lap, needing the child's warm weight to anchor her. "Yes, sweetheart. Her name is Louise. It's complicated." "All the best families are," Wyatt said, sitting across from them. "You don't have to explain if you're not ready." But Clara found she wanted to. These two had become her world. They deserved to know where she came from. "My father remarried when I was 12, she began. His new wife, Constance, already had money and social position. She never quite approved of the tall, awkward stepdaughter from father's first marriage. June's arms tightened around her. "That's mean." "She wasn't cruel, exactly, just cold. When Louise was born, I thought things might improve. I loved that baby fiercely." Clara's voice caught. "But Constance saw me as a bad influence. Too independent, too tall, too much my mother's daughter." "What happened?" Wyatt asked gently. When father died, I was 18. He left me a small inheritance, enough to live modestly. Constance made it clear I was no longer welcome in her home. Louise was only 6. She cried when I left, but... Clara shrugged. What choice did I have? And now she's written to you. Clara opened the letter, scanning it quickly. Her face went pale. Oh no! What is it? Wyatt was beside her instantly. Constance has died. Louise is 15 now. And apparently Constance's relatives are fighting over her guardianship and her inheritance. Clara's hands trembled. She's asking if she can come here. She has nowhere else to go. Silence filled the kitchen, broken only by the ticking clock. Finally, June spoke. She's your sister. Family comes here. Wyatt met Clara's eyes. June's right. If you want her here, we'll make room. Just like that. Clara's voice was thick with emotion. You'd take in a stranger, a 15-year-old girl you've never met. She's not a stranger, Wyatt said simply. She's your sister. That makes her our family. Clara set the letter aside and pulled them both close. This little family that had chosen her as fiercely as she'd chosen them. 2 weeks later, they stood at the train station again. Clara's hands twisted nervously in her skirts as passengers began disembarking. Would Louise even recognize her? Would she? Clara! A young woman flew down the platform. All golden curls and city fashion. Louise had grown beautiful, with their father's delicate features and Constance's refined bearing. Nothing like Clara's height and strong bones. Louise. Clara caught her sister, holding her as Louise sobbed against her shoulder. Oh, sweet girl, I'm so sorry about your mother. She never stopped being cold, Louise whispered. Even at the end, but I missed you so much, Clara, every day. Clara pulled back to study her sister's face. Despite the tears, she saw strength there, and a familiar, stubborn set to the chin. Come meet my family. Louise's eyes widened as she took in Wyatt's impressive height and June's curious face. You're married. You have a daughter. It's a long story. Wyatt, June, this is my sister Louise. June, never one for ceremony, marched up to Louise and announced, I'm June. I didn't used to talk, but now I do. Mama Clara fixed me. Are you broken too? June, Clara and Wyatt said together. But Louise laughed a bright, genuine sound. Maybe a little broken, she admitted to June. Think your mama can fix me too? She's very good at fixing things, June said seriously. And making bread, and sewing, and making Papa smile. All important skills, Louise agreed, her eyes twinkling. The ride to the ranch was filled with June's chatter and Louise's careful observations. Clara could see her sister cataloging everything the simple wagon. Wyatt's work clothes, Clara's practical dress, so different from the life they'd known in Denver. It's not what you're used to, Clara said quietly. No, Louise agreed. It's better, it's real. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, the table that now needed extra leaves to accommodate their growing family, Clara watched Louise slowly relax. June had appointed herself as guide and protector, showing off her sewing projects and teaching Louise the names of all the horses. You've built something beautiful here, Louise told Clara as they washed dishes together. I was so worried about you when Constance sent you away. She said you'd never amount to anything, that no man would want a woman who towered over him. One man's loss is another's treasure, Wyatt said from the doorway. Your sister saved this family. Louise, we were drowning in grief, and she taught us to swim again. Louise studied him with eyes older than her years. And you gave her a home, a real home. She never had that with us, not after Father died. I have it now, Clara said softly. And so do you, for as long as you want it. Actually, Louise said, color rising in her cheeks. I was hoping we could talk about that. I know I'm imposing terribly, but I wondered... That is, Constance never approved. But I've always wanted to be a teacher. Is there perhaps a school nearby where I might— Miss Bennett runs the school in town, Wyatt interrupted. She's been saying she needs an assistant, someone who could help with the younger children. Louise's face lit up. Truly, but would they accept someone so young? You're 15, educated, and Clara Reed Callan's sister, Wyatt said with a slight smile. That last part alone will open doors. Clara's made quite an impression on Timber Hollow. By standing up to bullies and healing broken families. June piped up from where she was supposed to be getting ready for bed. Mama's famous. Infamous, maybe, Clara muttered, but she was smiling. That night. After Louise was settled in the sewing room, Clara and Wyatt had moved to the main bedroom. After their marriage, Clara found herself on the porch again. It had become her thinking spot, her place to process the rapid changes in her life. Wyatt joined her, as she'd known he would. Regrets, he asked. Never, just marveling. 6 months ago, I was alone, rejected, with nowhere to go. Now I have a husband, a daughter, a sister, a home. She leaned against him. Sometimes I fear I'll wake and find it was all a dream. If it's a dream, we're all having it together. He wrapped an arm around her. Louise seems lovely. Young, but strong. Like someone else I know. She'll need time to adjust. And guidance. 15 is such a difficult age, especially after losing her mother. Good thing she has the best possible guide. Wyatt pressed a kiss to her temple. You've had practice healing one broken girl. Louise doesn't know how fortunate she is. From inside came the sound of June's laughter and Louise's answering giggle. Clara smiled. Listen to them, like they've known each other forever. Family recognizes family, Wyatt said simply. Blood or choice, doesn't matter. The heart knows its own. The next days were an adjustment. Louise threw herself into life at the ranch with enthusiasm, if not skill. She burned the porridge, scattered the chickens, and nearly got kicked by Wyatt's gentlest mare. But she also made June laugh until tears streamed down her face, helped with the household accounts using mathematical skills that impressed even Wyatt, and showed a natural talent for organizing the chaos of their busy life. She's nothing like you, Sarah Morrison observed during a visit, watching Louise attempt to milk a cow with comedic results. But also exactly like you. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Clara agreed. We had the same father but very different mothers. Yet underneath, we're both survivors. And both lucky to have found each other again. Sarah squeezed Clara's hand. This family of yours just keeps growing. First June finding her voice, then you and Wyatt marrying. Now Louise. What's next? Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. She'd been wondering the same thing, had noticed certain signs, but it was too early to be sure. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. As families do, Sarah agreed. That evening, Dr. Ward made one final attempt to cause trouble. He appeared at their door, official-looking papers in hand, claiming Louise was too young to make decisions about her own guardianship. Her mother's will clearly states, he began, that I have full say in my living arrangements. Louise interrupted, producing her own documents. I may be young, Dr. Ward, but I'm not ignorant. I know my rights. But surely a respected member of the community should oversee. Like who? Clara stepped forward. You, a man who's harassed this family for months out of wounded pride. I'm thinking of the child's welfare. No, Wyatt said flatly. You're thinking of Louise's inheritance and the influence it might bring. But you've miscalculated. Doctor, Louise is under our protection now, and unlike June, she's old enough and articulate enough to tell the whole town exactly what kind of man you are if you persist. Louise smiled sweetly. Oh, yes, I'd be delighted to share my observations about your character, Dr. Ward, starting with how you approached me at the station, offering to help manage my affairs before I'd even found my sister. Ward's face went white, then red. You can't threaten. It's not a threat, June piped up. It's a promise. Mama Clara taught us the difference. Faced with a united family, Ward retreated, muttering about propriety and proper procedures. They watched him drive away, and Clara felt a weight lift. Perhaps this was truly the end of his interference. Is he always that unpleasant? Louise asked. Always, June confirmed. But we're scarier than he is when we're together. Yes, Clara said, looking at her assembled family, the husband who'd chosen her, the daughter who'd healed alongside her, the sister who'd found her way home. Yes, we are. That night, as Clara helped Louise unpack the last of her belongings, her sister pulled out a small painting, a portrait of a younger Clara, obviously done from memory. I painted this when I was 12, Louise said shyly. Mother wanted me to throw it away, but I hid it. You were the only one who ever stood up to her, who showed me it was possible to be strong. Clara studied her younger self tall, awkward, but with defiant eyes. I wasn't strong then, just stubborn. Sometimes they're the same thing. Louise hugged her suddenly. Thank you for taking me in, for giving me a real family. Oh, sweet girl. Clara held her close. Thank you for being brave enough to find me. Later, curled in bed with Wyatt's arms around her, Clara marveled at how far they'd all come, from silence to song, from loneliness to laughter, from 3 broken people to a family of 4 with room for more. Happy, Wyatt asked against her hair their nightly ritual. Beyond words, she replied, as always. Then, quietly, Wyatt, how would you feel about the family growing even more? His arms tightened around her. Clara, are you... I think so. It's early yet, but... He turned her to face him, his eyes bright with wonder. Another child. Are you happy about it? Happy, he kissed her soundly. I'm overjoyed. June will be the best big sister, and Louise can help, and... He stopped. Are you happy about it? Beyond words, Clara repeated, laughing now. Though we'll need to add another room soon. I'll build a dozen rooms if needed, he promised. Whatever our family requires. Our family. Clara fell asleep smiling, surrounded by love, carrying new life, her heart as full as their bustling home. The woman who'd stepped off that train alone and unwanted had found everything she'd never dared dream of, and more. The summer evening was particularly warm, and Clara had opened all the windows to catch whatever breeze might stir. She sat at the kitchen table, working on tiny stitches for a baby's christening gown, while June practiced her letters and Louise graded papers from her assistant teaching position. Mama Clara, June said, not looking up from her slate. When the baby comes, will you still love me the same? Clara's needle paused. She'd been expecting this question for weeks, ever since they'd told June about the coming addition to their family. At 7 now, June was old enough to understand that babies required attention and care. Come here, sweetheart. Clara set aside her sewing and opened her arms. June climbed into her lap, careful of Clara's expanding middle. Do you remember when Aunt Louise came to live with us? June nodded. I was scared you'd love her more because she's your real sister. And do I? No. June's voice was thoughtful. You love us different but the same amount, like how Papa loves horses and cattle different but takes care of both. Louise laughed from her corner. I'm not sure I like being compared to livestock, but I understand the sentiment. The point is, Clara said, smoothing June's dark curls, love isn't like a pie that gets smaller when you cut more pieces. It's like your papa's spring. The more you draw from it, the more flows. My heart has room for you. Louise, your papa, this baby, and whoever else might join our family. Whoever else, Wyatt's voice came from the doorway. Planning a large family, are we? As large as God sees fit to bless us with, Clara replied, smiling at her husband. Though perhaps we should finish the new rooms before making too many plans. The construction had been ongoing for weeks, 2 new bedrooms and an expansion of the kitchen. The ranch was prospering. Thanks to Wyatt's skill with horses and Clara's growing seamstress business, they could afford to make the house accommodate their expanding family. Mr. Henderson wants to know if you can alter his daughter's wedding dress, Wyatt said, producing a note. Apparently, you're the only seamstress in 3 counties he trusts with imported silk. I suppose my reputation has improved since being the too tall reject at the train station, Clara said dryly. Your reputation, Louise interjected, is that you work miracles with fabric and families alike. Mrs. Davies told me yesterday that you've inspired 3 other women to take in orphaned relatives. All I did was love the people who needed loving. Exactly, June said, snuggling closer. That's the miracle part. Later that evening, after June was in bed, the 3 adults sat on the porch enjoying the cooler air. Louise was sketching a new hobby she'd taken up while Clara and Wyatt shared the porch swing. I've been thinking, Louise said suddenly, about staying permanently. I know I'm supposed to want my independence, set up my own household when I'm of age, but, Clara prompted gently. But this feels like home, more than Mother's house ever did. Would it be terrible if I wanted to stay, even after I'm 18? Maybe build my own little cabin on the property someday? Wyatt answered before Clara could. Louise, your family. Family stays as long as they want. We've got plenty of land, and when you're ready, we'll help you build whatever you need. Louise's eyes filled with tears. Constance always said I was too much like Clara, too tall, too opinionated, too everything. But here, being like Clara is a compliment. The highest compliment, Wyatt agreed, squeezing Clara's hand. Though I draw the line at my height, Clara said. You're still delightfully petite, little sister. For now, Louise laughed. I had another growth spurt last month. I might catch up to you yet. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the evening sounds of the ranch. Then Clara gasped, pressing a hand to her stomach. What is it? Wyatt was instantly alert. Is the baby moving? Clara breathed. Oh, such strong movements. Here, feel. She guided Wyatt's hand to the spot where tiny feet or fists were making their presence known. His face transformed with wonder. Louise, come feel. Clara invited. Her sister approached hesitantly, then laughed with delight as she felt the movement. Oh, it's like there's really a person in there. There is indeed, Clara said, a very active person who seems to have opinions about evening conversations. June will be so excited tomorrow, Louise said. She asks every day if the baby is kicking yet. Speaking of June, Wyatt said carefully, I had an interesting visit from Miss Bennett today. She says June is ready for more advanced lessons. Suggested she might benefit from some time at the academy in Denver. Clara stiffened. Send her away. She's only 7. Not permanently. Maybe a term or 2, to challenge her mind. She's bright. Clara, brighter than the local school can accommodate. But she needs us, after everything she's been through, which is why we'd visit often, and she'd come home for holidays. Wyatt rubbed Clara's shoulders. I'm not saying we should, just that we should consider what's best for her future. Louise spoke up. What if I increased my studies? I could work with June on advanced subjects. Miss Bennett might help. She's mentioned wanting to start an advanced program for exceptional students. Would you want that responsibility on top of your teaching? Clara asked. June's my niece, Louise said simply. Besides, she keeps me on my toes. Yesterday she asked me to explain why birds fly but people can't, and we ended up studying anatomy books for 2 hours. She gets her curiosity from her father, Clara said, relaxing slightly, always wanting to understand how things work, and her determination from her stepmother. Wyatt countered. Have you seen her practicing embroidery? She'll repeat a stitch 50 times until it's perfect. Her birth mother's artistic eye. Clara added softly. She sees beauty where others might miss it. They'd made a practice of this, acknowledging all the influences that shaped June, honoring Margaret's memory while celebrating the present. A cramp seized Clara's middle, different from the baby's movements. She breathed through it, not wanting to worry the others. But Wyatt noticed immediately. "How long have you been having pains?" "Just twinges, Mrs. Morrison says it's normal at this stage." "Mrs. Morrison isn't a doctor. Neither is Dr. Ward, as far as I'm concerned." Clara said firmly, "I won't have that man near me or this baby." "There's a midwife in Silver Creek," Louise suggested. "Mrs. Kowalski. She delivered the Petrova twins last month. Everyone says she's wonderful." "Silver Creek is 20 miles. Wyatt worried. "Then we'd better introduce ourselves soon," Clara said practically. "I won't have this baby without proper help, but I also won't subject us to Dr. Ward's interference." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Clara was hanging laundry when a carriage pulled up, far finer than anything usually seen in Timber Hollow. A woman descended elegantly dressed, probably in her 40s, with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes. "Mrs. Callan." Her voice was cultured, Eastern educated. "I'm Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell. I believe you knew my niece, Margaret." Clara's hand stilled on the clothesline. "You're Margaret's aunt. Please, come inside. Would you like some tea?" "That would be lovely." Clara led her to the parlor, mind racing. Why was Margaret's relative here now? What did she want? "Mrs. Hartwell settled herself elegantly, taking in the room with appraising eyes. Her gaze lingered on June's sampler, hung prominently on the wall beside Margaret's work. "The child is well?" she asked. "Very well. She's at school right now, but she'll be home for lunch. I'm sure Wyatt would want to—" "Actually, it's you I came to see, Mrs." Hartwell accepted the tea with a nod. "I've been hearing interesting things about the woman who married my niece's widower." Clara kept her expression neutral. "Oh, that you've restored the child's voice, that you've brought order to a household in chaos, that you've even taken in your own sister." The woman's eyes were shrewd. "Either the reports are exaggerated or you're quite remarkable. I've simply done what needed doing." Mrs. Hartwell sipped her tea. "You should know. I opposed Margaret's marriage to Mr. Callan, not because I disliked him, he seemed decent enough, but because Margaret was fragile, delicate. I feared the hardships of ranch life would break her." Clara waited, sensing there was more. "I was right, though it brings me no satisfaction." The older woman's voice softened. "Margaret was my favorite niece, talented, sweet, but unsuited for struggle. When I heard she died in childbirth, leaving a traumatized child and grieving husband, I considered intervening." "Why didn't you—" "Pride, anger at being proved right, foolishness." Mrs. Hartwell set down her cup. "By the time I overcame my own stubbornness, I heard a new woman had taken charge. I expected, well, not you." "What did you expect?" "Someone taking advantage. A gold digger, perhaps, or a woman desperate enough to accept anything." She studied Clara openly. "Instead, I find a woman of obvious intelligence and capability, in a house full of life and laughter. That's June's work." She gestured to a small embroidered cushion. "Yes, she's quite talented. Like Margaret, but stronger. It seems like you." Mrs. Hartwell stood, moving to the window. "I came here planning to offer my help, financial assistance. Perhaps take June for proper education. I see now that would be insulting." "June has everything she needs here," Clara said carefully. "But family is always welcome, if you'd like to be part of her life." "Would I be welcome?" The vulnerability in the question surprised Clara. "Of course. You're her family, Margaret's aunt. That connection matters." "Mrs." Hartwell turned. and Clara was shocked to see tears in her eyes. "You truly aren't threatened by Margaret's memory." "Why would I be? She gave life to June. She loved Wyatt enough to marry him. She's part of this family's story." Clara stood, one hand on her expanding middle. "I can honor that while writing new chapters." "My dear girl." Mrs. Hartwell crossed to take Clara's hands. "Margaret would have liked you, in her clear moments. She worried so about leaving June motherless. To know the child has you, it's a gift." The front door burst open, and June's voice carried clearly. "Mama Clara, I got perfect marks on my arithmetic. Miss Bennett says I can start the advanced book." She skidded into the parlor and stopped short at the sight of a stranger. But Clara saw the moment recognition dawn something in Mrs. Hartwell's eyes or bearing that echoed Margaret. "Are you my mama's aunt?" June asked directly. "You look like the painting in Papa's study." "I am indeed, and you must be June." Mrs. Hartwell knelt gracefully, bringing herself to June's level. "My, how you've grown. Last time I saw you, you were just toddling." June studied her solemnly. "Mama Clara says family is important. Are you good family or difficult family?" "June," Clara admonished. But Mrs. Hartwell laughed a rich, genuine sound. "What a perfect question. I've been difficult family, I'm afraid, but I'd very much like to be good family. If you'll let me try." June considered this. "Can you sew?" "I embroider tolerably." "Can you make cookies?" "I have a receipt for the best ginger snaps in Boston." "Do you like horses?" "I prefer carriages, but I can appreciate a fine animal." June nodded decisively. "You can stay for lunch. We'll see about the rest." And so their circle expanded again. Mrs. Hartwell Aunt Eleanor, as June decided to call her, extended her visit from days to weeks. She proved surprisingly adaptable, helping with household tasks despite her fine clothes, sharing stories of Margaret's childhood that made June laugh and Wyatt smile with remembered love. "You've done something remarkable here," she told Clara one evening as they prepared dinner together. "You've made a place where grief and joy can coexist, where the past is honored but doesn't overshadow the present." "We've all done it together," Clara corrected. "Even you, coming here, being willing to know us, that takes courage." Eleanor smiled. "My dear, after seeing what you've built here, how could I stay away? This is what family should be chosen, and blood, past and present, all woven together like one of June's samplers." That night, as Clara lay in bed with Wyatt's hand resting protectively over their growing child, she marveled at the journey. From rejection and solitude to this a family that seemed to grow broader and deeper with each passing season. "Happy," Wyatt murmured, "their nightly ritual." "Beyond words," she replied, as always, but tonight she added, "and grateful. For you, for June, for all of it. Even Aunt Eleanor's inspection, especially that. She's bringing photo albums next visit. June will get to see more of her mother." Wyatt pulled her closer. "Have I told you today that you're remarkable?" "Only 3 times. Insufficient. You're remarkable. Clara Callan, and I love you beyond words." She smiled in the darkness, feeling the baby move beneath their joined hands, hearing Louise's soft singing from her room as she prepared for bed, knowing June slept peacefully down the hall and that tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys in equal measure. This was family complex, sometimes difficult, always worth it, and there was room still for it to grow. The first drops of rain began just after breakfast, gentle at first but steadily increasing. Clara stood at the window, one hand pressed to her lower back where a persistent ache had settled. The baby wasn't due for another 3 weeks, but her body felt different today, heavy and restless. "You should sit," Louise suggested, looking up from the lesson she was preparing for June. "You've been pacing all morning." "Sitting makes it worse." Clara tried to smile reassuringly. "Just the baby pressing on everything, Mrs. Morrison warned me the last weeks would be uncomfortable. June abandoned her embroidery to wrap her arms around Clara's expanded middle. Maybe the baby wants to come out and meet us. Not yet, sweetheart. We need... Clara gasped as a stronger pain rippled through her. We need a bit more time to prepare. But her body had other plans. By noon, the discomfort had transformed into unmistakable contractions. Louise sent June to fetch Wyatt from the barn while she helped Clara to bed. The midwife. Clara managed between pains. We need to send for Mrs. Kowalski. Wyatt burst through the door, rain-soaked and wild-eyed. Clara, is it time? I believe so. She gripped his hand as another contraction built. But the storm. I'll go myself, he said immediately. Tom Morrison can come stay with you while... No. Clara's voice was firm despite the pain. You stay here. Send Jake with the fastest horse. Jake, their hired hand, was dispatched within minutes. Louise took charge with surprising efficiency, preparing clean linens and setting water to boil while June hovered anxiously in the doorway. Come here, sweetheart, Clara called when the contraction passed. This is all normal, just the baby getting ready to join our family. June approached carefully, as if Clara might break. Does it hurt very much? Some, Clara admitted. But it's a good hurt, the kind that brings something wonderful. Eleanor, who had extended her visit indefinitely, appeared with an armload of towels. I helped deliver my sister's children years ago, she said briskly. Between Louise and myself, we can manage until the midwife arrives. The storm intensified as the afternoon wore on. Wyatt never left Clara's side except to pace to the window, watching for Jake's return. The contractions grew stronger and closer together. Tell me a story, Clara requested during a brief respite. June, tell me about your sampler design. June launched into a detailed explanation of the flowers she was embroidering, her voice helping Clara focus on something beyond the pain. Louise wiped Clara's forehead with cool cloths, while Eleanor timed contractions with Wyatt's pocket watch. They're very close now, Eleanor murmured to Wyatt. If the midwife doesn't arrive soon... A shout from outside interrupted her. Jake had returned, but alone. Wyatt ran downstairs and came back with a grim expression. The bridge at Miller's Creek washed out. Mrs. Kowalski can't get through. She sent instructions and... He swallowed hard. She said Eleanor and Louise would have to manage. Clara felt a moment of panic before June's small hand found hers. Mama Clara is the bravest person I know, the child announced. And we're all here to help. That's right, Louise said, rolling up her sleeves with determination. We're family. We can do this together. What followed were the longest and shortest hours of Clara's life. The pain was intense, but she was surrounded by Love Wyatt's steady presence, Louise's calm competence, Eleanor's experienced guidance, and June's sweet encouragement. You're doing beautifully, Eleanor assured her as evening fell. Not much longer now. Clara wanted to laugh at the idea of anything about this being beautiful, but another contraction stole her breath. She bore down, gripping Wyatt's hand hard enough to leave marks. I can see the head, Louise announced, her voice filled with wonder. Dark hair like June's. One more push, Eleanor coached. That's it, my dear. You're almost there. With a final effort that seemed to pull strength from the very earth, Clara brought her child into the world. A lusty cry filled the room, the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. A girl, Louise laughed through her tears. A perfect little girl. Eleanor quickly cleaned and wrapped the baby before placing her in Clara's arms. The infant was tiny, but fierce, her cries announcing her displeasure at leaving her warm haven. Oh, Clara breathed, studying the miniature features. Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you. Wyatt's tears fell freely as he touched his daughter's cheek with one gentle finger. She's beautiful, perfect, just like her mother. Can I see? June whispered from where she'd been stationed as the official water fetcher. Come meet your sister. Clara invited June approached with reverence, her eyes huge. "She's so small. Was I that small?" "Even smaller," Wyatt told her, "but just as perfect." "What will we call her?" Louise asked, perching on the bed's edge to admire her new niece. Clara and Wyatt exchanged glances. They'd discussed names for months, but hadn't settled on anything definite. "I was thinking," Clara said softly. "Margaret Louise Callan, for the mother who came before and the aunt who helped bring her safely into the world." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, my dear girl, Margaret would be so honored." "And overwhelmed," Louise added, tears streaming. "I don't deserve—" "You do," Wyatt said firmly. "Your family, both of you." He included Eleanor in his gaze. This little one is blessed to have so many people who love her already. June studied her new sister intently. "Maggie," she decided. "Baby Maggie. Is that acceptable?" "That's perfect," Clara assured her, as if in agreement. The baby's cries quieted. She blinked up at the circle of faces surrounding her, seeming to take in this family she'd been born into, unconventional perhaps, but bound by choice and love. The storm had passed by the time they'd gotten Clara comfortable, and the baby settled for her first feeding. Eleanor and Louise bustled about, cleaning up and preparing food for everyone. June curled up beside Clara, watching her sister nurse with fascination. "I'm going to teach her everything," June announced. "Letters and numbers and sewing and how to ride horses and which chickens peck and which are friendly." "That's quite a curriculum," Clara laughed softly. "Good thing she'll have such a dedicated teacher." Wyatt sat on Clara's other side, his arm around both his daughters. "I never imagined this," he said quietly. "When you stepped off that train, rejected and alone, did you imagine this?" "Never," Clara admitted. "I thought I was coming here for one life and found something entirely different. Something infinitely better." "We all did," Eleanor said from the doorway. "This family has a way of gathering people who need gathering." Later, when the house was quiet and baby Maggie slept in the cradle Wyatt had built, Clara lay wakeful despite her exhaustion. Through the window, she could see stars emerging as clouds cleared, the same stars she'd wished on as a lonely woman in Denver, as a rejected bride at the train station, as a nervous governess on her first night in this house. "What are you thinking?" Wyatt whispered. "About circles," Clara said. "How life brings us full circle in ways we never expect. I came here to be a wife and was rejected. But in being rejected, I found you and June, found Louise again, met Eleanor, created this. Fate, Wyatt suggested. Family, Clara corrected. The family we choose and build and nurture, the family that chooses us back." The baby stirred, making small sounds that would soon turn to hungry cries. Clara prepared to rise, but Wyatt was already up, lifting tiny Maggie with practiced gentleness. "I've done this before," he reminded Clara, settling the baby in her arms. "Though last time, I was terrified and alone. This time," he smiled, "this time I have you. We have each other." As Clara fed her daughter, she heard June's door open. Small feet padded down the hall, followed by larger ones, Louise checking on her charge. They appeared in the doorway together, June rubbing sleepy eyes. "Is baby Maggie hungry?" June asked. "Babies are always hungry," Louise informed her. "Come, let's give your parents privacy." But June had already climbed onto the bed. Settling against Wyatt's side, Louise shrugged and joined them, creating a warm tangle of family in the lamplight. "Tell the story," June requested, "about Mama Clara coming on the train." It had become a favorite bedtime tale, how Mama Clara came to town and was brave when the mean doctor was rude, how Papa offered her a job, how June chose her with mysterious wisdom, how their family grew and grew. Clara began the familiar narrative, but this time with additions. And that very night, as Mama Clara lay in her new room, A tiny seed was already planted, a baby who would come to complete our family circle. That was me, June realized with delight. Baby Maggie was already starting to grow. Perhaps she was, Clara agreed, waiting for the right moment to join our story. Eleanor appeared with tea, distributing cups before settling in the rocking chair. Every good story needs an audience, she explained, making June giggle. And so they spent Maggie's first night all together, sharing warmth and stories and quiet laughter. The baby finished nursing and was passed from arm to arm, each family member welcoming her in their own way. June sang the lullabies she'd been practicing. Louise whispered promises of adventures to come. Eleanor spoke softly of the grandmother Maggie would never meet, but whose legacy lived on. Wyatt simply held his daughter, his face soft with wonder and gratitude. We should all get some sleep, Clara finally suggested, though no one moved. In a moment, Wyatt said, let's just be all of us together. So they remained an unlikely family formed by circumstance, strengthened by choice, and blessed beyond measure. Outside, dawn approached with fingers of gold and rose, painting the mountains that had witnessed so much sorrow and joy. Look, June whispered. The sun's coming up, Maggie's first sunrise. They turned to watch the light grow, the baby peaceful in her father's arms, surrounded by more love than anyone could measure. Clara felt her heart might burst with the fullness of it all. Happy, Wyatt asked softly, their nightly ritual now a dawn blessing. Beyond words, Clara replied, as always. But this time, everyone echoed her. Beyond words, they chorused softly. A family's benediction for the new day and all the days to come. In the golden light of morning, Clara looked around at these people who'd become her world. The man who'd hired her in desperation and loved her by choice. The daughter who'd claimed her with silent determination and now chattered freely. The sister who'd found her way home across years and miles. The aunt who'd overcome pride to embrace a new family configuration. And now this tiny new soul, born into such abundance of love. From solitude to this surely there was no richer journey. Clara had come to Timber Hollow expecting to be someone's wife. Instead, she'd become the heart of a family that defied convention but defined love in its truest form. Baby Maggie stirred and opened dark eyes, seeming to take in this bright world she'd joined. June leaned close, whispering, "Welcome home, little sister. You're going to love it here," and watching them all in the gentle morning light. Clara knew June was right. This was home messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. The rejected bride had become the beloved center of a family built not just on blood, but on the choice to love, to stay, to grow together. The rain had washed the world clean, and everything sparkled with possibility. Just like their family, unconventional, unexpected, and uncommonly blessed. Thank you so much for listening to this heartwarming tale of love, family, and second chances in the Old West. I hope Clara and Wyatt's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it with you. Please take a moment to comment below and let me know where you're listening from. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this story and connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more tales of courage, love, and adventure from the American frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help this story reach more listeners who appreciate authentic Western romance. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset of happiness.